I think we'll reconvene. Mandy will be back in a moment. Okay. So, thanks. Sorry for the pause there. Okay, right now it's time for a presentation from a couple people from the Washington State Hospital Association, the Washington Hospital Services Peer Review Program. Yes, Taya Briley and Rocky Kerr.
All right.
It's all yours.
All right, thank you. So I'll try standing here, and you can tell me if this works or it doesn't. I'm going to kick it off, and I will introduce myself just a little bit, and then I'll have Dr. Kerr introduce himself a little bit. So my name is Taya, and I work for the Washington State Hospital Association. I'm the Executive Vice President and General Counsel, and I have a background in nursing and in law, and I'm very pleased to be here with you tonight talking about this topic of physician credentialing and privileging. And I'm also really glad that Dr. Kerr is here to do this with me, because I think it's great to have the perspective of both the legal side of things and the physician side of things. And Dr. Kerr has great perspective from being all around the state. So you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Thank you for having me here. I'm Rocky Kerr. I was an ER physician in Spokane, Washington for 25 years, and I retired about a year ago. And I worked for the Washington State Health Association in their subsidiary, Washington Health Services, doing outside medical staff peer review for critical access hospitals, of which this is one of the hospitals I go to, but I go to 18 others. I go to 17 others around the state too. I still have a little bit of clinical stuff that I do. I volunteer at the House of Charity Clinic in Spokane and the Gospel Mission in Spokane. So that's my background.
Great, thanks. So you all are going to be our guinea pigs. We haven't done this before. This is special just for you. If it works, maybe we'll do it again. So feel free to give us some feedback. So, and I want to thank Julie for asking us here to do this with you. So go ahead and advance to the next slide. Okay, so what we're going to do tonight is we'll talk a little bit about sort of provide some grounding. What is credentialing? What's privileging? What's the board role? What's the medical staff role? We'll talk some about the areas of risk involved with this work, because of all the many things that you do as board members, I think this is one that does entail some risk, and you might not appreciate kind of where that risk may come into play. So we'll talk some about that, and we'll talk about best practices. What's the state of the art in terms of best practices in this area, and we'll have time for question and answers. And we can definitely do some questions and answers as we go along too. So, okay. All right, so we'll start out a little bit with some background here about the board's role and medical staff role. Okay, so just so we are sort of on the same page about what is credentialing, what is privileging, some of you really are well grounded in that, and others may be coming up to speed. Here we've got at least one new board member here tonight, so at least for his sake, we'll do this. Okay, so credentialing. This is the process by which practitioners are admitted to the medical staff. So this is how they become members of your medical staff. Also, there's a reappointment to the medical staff that happens, and we'll get into a little bit about how that happens. So basically, do you get to be on the medical staff? Do you get to be re-upped for your participation on the medical staff? And just for the sake of sort of understanding the distinction, it's worth knowing practitioners can have privileges without having membership on the medical staff, and they can have privileges or membership on the medical staff without having privileges. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. Privileging or providing privileges to a practitioner is different than credentialing. So once you're on the medical staff, there's the question of what are you going to do? So you can think of privileging as being the job description for what you're going to do once you're sort of a member of the club and you're on the medical staff. What do you get to do within the hospital? So the privileges can be expanded or contracted based on what the skill set of that practitioner is. And folks will usually come in with a defined set of privileges, and those can be modified based on what you all are seeing practice-wise. So again, to distinguish this concept, you could have a practitioner that has privileges to come into your hospital and perform some sort of specialized service on a one-time or two-time basis, very occasional basis, but they may not be a member of the medical staff. You could have a member of the medical staff, for instance, somebody who might be retired and no longer practicing, so they wouldn't have privileges, but they maintain a role on the medical staff. And the reason I offer those examples is just to help you to distinguish what are these two different things, credentialing and privileging. Okay, go ahead and do the next one. Okay, so a little bit about the role of the medical staff in granting credentials and in establishing privileges. And we'll get into the process by which this happens just a little bit later in the presentation, but I think it's worth spending just a minute here on the roles. So medical staff, the existing medical staff, the folks who are kind of already members of the club, have an important role to play. And their role is in assessing what they're seeing for applicants that want to be on the medical staff and making recommendations to you all as board members. So that's the very important role that these experts play relative to you board members who may not be experts. But the board has a really, really important role to play too. You all are the ultimate authority, you're the ultimate decision maker, and you have ultimate responsibility for making decisions about who goes on your medical staff. And that is not something to be taken lightly, and we'll talk about that a little bit about why later. It's worth just talking about. It can be really tempting as board members to defer and say, I'm not an expert, we'll let the experts handle this and lead us to our decisions. But it's very important to bring that critical thinking and critical eye to the process because ultimately, like I said, you all are the decision makers. And we'll go ahead and talk about some of the sources of authority for your role. Go ahead and go to the next slide. There are a lot of sources of authority that help determine your role as board members. And we're not going to, as we go through this presentation, cite to each one of these. There's actually, at the end of this presentation, which I really hope we don't get to, but if we have to, I've got an appendix for you all, and some of the authority is provided in the appendix. So if you're really curious about what's there, we can reference it. So these are all the different sources of authority that are going to govern your role, going to govern the role of the medical staff, and govern all the processes that you're following to do this. So the Medicare conditions of participation, if you see Medicare patients and you want to get paid, that's one source of authority for the rules that you need to follow. The Revised Code of Washington, I heard earlier that you all have to follow it, so y'all are definitely going to want to follow that. The Washington Administrative Code is a set of regulations that sits underneath the Revised Code of Washington. That's another source of authority. And the Joint Commission, I included some references or some material here from the Joint Commission just because I think it's a good source for best practice, but as I understand, you are not Joint Commission accredited, so you're not having to follow this particular standard, but it's a good reference point. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so a little bit about areas of risk, and go ahead and move forward there. Thank you. I love this little quote up here. This is from Jamie Orlikov, who is a hospital governance expert. And this is him speaking to fellow boards. He advises boards. He sits on boards. I think he has been a member of the Virginia Mason Board. What you approve as board members is what you promote as board members. So that's sort of a good nugget that I thought I might pass along tonight that you might tuck in the back of your head. So as board members, you can create risk, and you can create risk by allowing physicians to use the process to lock out competition. So that's one area where, as a health law student, I got to read cases about boards that approved credentialing and privileging decisions made by medical staff that was really designed to lock out competition and give the current members of the medical staff a lock on business. So that's something that you can inadvertently even do as board members. That's one reason you're going to be wanting to be thinking hard about what you're approving. guarantee a livelihood, falling into the trap of, oh gosh, this person's been a member of our medical staff forever, and yes, there might be concerns, but we are going to make sure that they're able to practice because we don't want this person to fall on hard times. So that's, at best of intent, but can be creating risk. And applying criteria for privileges or a membership on the medical staff that are unspecific. So if you're not detailed in what the criteria are that you're using for evaluating people, and you let somebody in, but then you don't let somebody else in, and you're not able to articulate the basis upon which you made that decision, that's a potential area of risk. Or if you've got a criteria stated, but you apply it unequally is another way that you can create risk. Or you've got even worse, this is probably even worse, I will say as a lawyer, this is the even worse category. You have the criteria and then you don't follow them. Courts really don't like that. All right, go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so a few ways about how this risk can manifest. I just talked about this idea of locking out the competition. That's actually, I heard earlier you all have to follow federal law too. That's a violation of federal law. It's called economic credentialing, and it can be a really big deal from an antitrust standpoint if inadvertently or intentionally the board is approving decisions that locks out competition by failing to grant privileges on the medical staff. You can get yourselves into trouble by failing to meet the requirements of the Healthcare Quality Improvement Act or the one below, which is the state level version of the Healthcare Quality Improvement Act. And I bet you're all just dying to know, what is the Healthcare Quality Improvement Act? The Healthcare Quality Improvement Act is the federal law and, like I said, state law equivalent that spells out the process by which you grant credentials and privileges to your healthcare providers. And the upshot of this law is you need to follow the process. And there are lots of ways that hospitals or healthcare systems or organizations can get themselves into trouble by not following a process, right? Like if there's an HR process and you don't follow it, you can get into trouble. But I'm here to tell you, this is one area where you are especially vulnerable for not following your established processes in your medical staff bylaws for physician credentialing, privileging, disciplinary processes. So we have this is like breaking news, this last one here, or next to last one on the legislation. Right now, as we speak, there's a bill making its way through the Washington State Legislature that is going to provide yet one more way for folks who are unhappy, physicians or other practitioners who may be unhappy about how the board made decisions about their ability to be granted privileges or credentials on your medical staff, allowing for them to make a whistleblower complaint to the Washington State Department of Health. So that's sort of the latest development. All of these things, except for the last one, are likely to come up if you have a practitioner who is unhappy with your decision about granting privileges, either to themselves or to somebody else. So that's just to sort of provide some context to you all. And the way that you avoid liability in those areas is really, again, by following your process and making sure you have a clearly articulated process. So just want to kind of give you the gist of all of these things except the last one. The last one, Dr. Kerr is going to go into more detail in, and it's a little bit different. This one is likely to come up in a totally different context, and the context for this one is if you have something go wrong with care in your hospital. So if you have something go wrong with care in your hospital, that creates a situation where you may have an unhappy patient, you may have an unhappy family, they may have experienced an adverse event, and they may be seeking damages from the hospital. So in one of those situations, they may be looking for the physician who's making decisions about that patient's care as a source that they will go after for a medical malpractice claim. There's also potential to come after the hospital. And that's where this negligent credentialing really starts to play a role, and that's where Dr. Kerr is going to pick it up and talk about what the issues are there and some best practices and how to avoid pitfalls.
Okay, so legally this is recognized as something the hospital may have done wrong. And what it is, it's a direct liability. If you're negligent, it doesn't matter whether the physician made a mistake or not, you can be held directly liable for that. So you go to the next slide. So, and they don't need to be employees of the hospital. If they're just on your staff, and they shouldn't have been on your staff, that's considered negligent privileging. Go on to the next one. So to have negligent credentialing, there are three things that have to happen. One, you didn't meet the standard and you credentialed the person in the first place. Second of all, they made a mistake. They were negligent, and that mistake can be related back to the fact that you credentialed them in the first place. Go to the next one. So basically, if the doctor wasn't negligent and the hospital's not negligent, it also means that if the physician or the provider was negligent, doesn't necessarily mean that the hospital was negligent in credentialing them. I mean, we all have bad outcomes from time to time. That doesn't necessarily mean that the hospital made a mistake putting you on their staff. Go to the next one.
Can we go back?
Sure.
The one before that, the 1, 2, 3.
There. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So the takeaways from this is when you're credentialing people, it's really important to make sure that those people are competent, that the system you have in place you have followed, that you haven't deviated from what your policies and procedures were, and also understand that even if you have an adverse outcome and the provider settles or is not found liable, the hospital can still be found liable outside of that. So we'll go to the next one. This has to do with waiving privileges. If you end up having to defend your credentialing to somebody, you have to defend what is in that credentialing package. The conversations that you have around that, those privileged conversations and stuff, those aren't admissible. It's what's in the package. So, if you were in conversations and one of your medical staff says, well, I know this guy, I just practiced as in residency, he's really good, but the package doesn't support that, you're not going to be able to use the subjective information that you had in these privileged conversations. It's going to be based on what is in the credentialing package. We just go through some of the, one of the things is the physician or the provider does not have to be employed by the hospital as long as the patient felt that the provider was in some way associated with the hospital through their badge, their coat, your advertising, whatever, then it's based on patient's perception, not whether or not they actually were employed by the hospital or not. So you can go on to the next one. So you can make, yes, I'm a doctor, I worked at the hospital, yes. The only option for you, yes, I wear a badge. So, everything we do makes people think that providers are employees at the facility, and that's going to be the basis of this, even though they may not be. So you can go on to the next one.
All right.
I think it's got.
Yeah, and it might be helpful for me to give you an example of a case that is probably just a few years old here from Washington State that involved negligent credentialing. And the facts might help you sort of understand how liability for the board can arise. So this is this actual case. It was a patient of a Washington State hospital who was morbidly obese, and a physician who was performing laparoscopic robotic surgery to perform a gallbladder removal. And the physician was a newbie, was just learning this skill, and had done some practice on, I think, animals, maybe pigs, maybe had done some supervised surgeries, but had not performed surgery extensively on his own, one, and two, not on morbidly obese patients for which this robotic surgery was contraindicated. And the hospital looked at his scope of privileges and granted him privileges to perform this surgery. He was within the scope of his privileges when he performed the surgery, which, as you can all guess, went horribly wrong, and the patient wound up dying, and this wound up being a very large medical malpractice verdict. That physician was an independent member of the medical staff, was not an employee of the hospital. And the doctor was sued, and the hospital was sued. And the hospital could make the argument, this was an independent member of the medical staff. You know, our nurses, our surgical suite, nothing was wrong with the performance of our staff or our equipment. And it was the physician's judgment to perform this surgery that was off. But in this lawsuit, no surprise, the plaintiff's lawyer looked further. Did this physician have privileges that were granted by the hospital to perform the surgery? The answer is yes. So that's the hook by which there was finding hospital liability in this case. So that maybe is a factual scenario that can help you understand a little bit how the liability can transfer. Okay, so we'll go ahead and go into some best practices now that we've painted really sad scenarios for you. What are we going to do to make sure this is really good practice here so that we're making good decisions? Okay, so at the start of the process, you have a practitioner that's seeking privileges at your hospital. And there's a decision to be made about whether to grant that person the credential to be a member of your medical staff. And so this is a really important juncture, because this is your best place to make a decision to not allow somebody to be a member of your medical staff, because at that point the burden is on the applicant to show that they are worthy of being on your medical staff. So this is your point at which you can be picky, and you're going to want to have a really thorough process to review all of this person's their background check and their credentials, and their you will want to see if they've been disbarred. You want to look at any prior National Practitioner Data Bank reports and so forth. I mean, you have people on your staff that pull this information together for you, but you're going to want to make sure that you are reviewing it thoroughly. And it's good to have multiple eyes on these materials. So it's not just one person, but a process. And we'll talk a little bit about the process as we get into the next slides.
So, I just got a question at this point.
Please.
Yeah, I'm involved in doing
Yes.
this stuff.
Yes, you know.
We always worry that we were denying somebody membership.
Yes.
Are we liable to be sued for, say they have some negative things in their background.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically a judgment thing of whether or not that person should be allowed to be on staff or not.
Yep.
And if we just, how liable are we for being capricious in our decision to not grant privileges?
Well, you will be happy to hear that you would have immunity if you based your decision on a good faith belief that that person was not the right fit for your medical staff. So if you're making decisions in good faith based on the information in front of you, there's actually an immunity that's provided in one of the laws that I referred to earlier, the federal law that's also codified in the state law, the Healthcare Quality Improvement Act, that protects you. Now that said, could there be a lawsuit? There could always be a lawsuit. There could always be a lawsuit. But I think what you've got to weigh in your minds or balance out is, yes, there could be a lawsuit for that. There's a good chance you'd win. If you admit this person to your medical staff, then you've got to figure out, all right, what comes next? Then we've got to provide them privileges, then they're practicing here, and then we've got exposure in potentially much bigger ways. So, yeah, it's a really good question because it's not an unfounded concern.
But the reason I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, the reason Dr. O'Brien brings this up is because this is something we've struggled with. It is, some of us on the board have had the impression that once it gets to us, that if we were to deny someone privileges, that it would be a horrible catastrophe, that we would put some sort of mark on this person's record, we would get sued, it would be a mess. And so some of us have felt like there's this pressure to kind of prove. But what I'm hearing is it's not that it's not that much of a pressure, that it kind of goes the other way, that if we were to let someone in, that we would open ourselves up to this charge of negligence.
There are some, actually we talked about this a little bit as we were getting ready to come talk to you tonight, and there are some considerations if you're going to deny those privileges or credentials. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? Yeah, I was going to say,
if you read through your policies for initial credentialing and privileging and the re-credentialing, credentialing, it actually states in there it's a written recommendation, and and if the board accepts or decides not to accept, that is also a written statement, and the reason for whatever the decisions are according to your policies have to be written in those approvals or those recommendations. So you go back to the credentialing package, and you just point out, well, you had, the provider had 4 lawsuits and 2 payouts in the last 4 years. We just felt, that kind of thing could come up, or there was these actions were taken at these other hospitals or whatever. Just if you've got objective reasons for why you're doing that, and you put that in, then I think, obviously a lawyer would know better than I, but I think you would cover your tracks pretty well.
The reason Matt brings that up is because we've been sort of faced with an argument that, well, if you deny admission to medical staff, that report goes to the National Practitioner Database, and well, you really don't want to do that.
Yeah, and
that's not a legitimate argument.
Well, could it be a concern for that practitioner? Yes, and so one way to facilitate that is to allow their withdrawal. You can let them know that you're planning to deny it. You could potentially allow them to withdraw their candidacy.
Yeah, that's kind of a sketchy area too, because if you tell them you're not going to, and then you say they can withdraw, that in itself can be reported.
Yes, that's true too.
Have you ever withdrawn your application based on denial of privileges?
That's true too. I think the bottom line, though, that Dr. Kerr articulated that I think is really important is documenting your reasons for your decision. Because at the end of the day, if there's ever a challenge, you want to be able to cite to your reasons for denying.
Speaking to recommending they withdraw their application, is it okay to, let's say that we have reservations about a particular applicant, and then we talk to Dr. O'Brien and say, we really recommend that they withdraw that. By the time it gets to the board meeting, is it too late to ask that, or can we delay decision on a particular applicant pending recommending that they withdraw their application?
Your procedures and policies allow you to, there's a set amount of time, and I can't remember whether it's 10 days or 15 days, but you can go ahead and put those things on hold for a short temporary amount of time to do more consideration.
May I suggest that we let the presentation complete and then ask all our questions, because I have several and I was thinking we should wait till we finish and then go back.
Sure.
Is that all right?
Sure.
Yeah, and it's not a super long presentation, so hopefully we will have plenty of time for that. Okay, so initial appointment, that's your time to have the burden on the applicant, and you get to be picky. Okay, so go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so reappointment, the burden now shifts. So the burden is now on you all as a health system to prove, if you are seeing practice concerns, that this person should not continue to either have their status as a member of your medical staff or the set of privileges that they have been granted. So the burden is a little bit higher at this point, or it's shifted, and it becomes a little more challenging for the board or the medical staff as it makes recommendations to the board to curtail somebody's privileges or credentials. So listed here are some of the things that you all should be doing as you decide on reappointment. So you, by this time, will have information on how this practitioner is practicing, and it's really important to actually pull that information and look at it. Depending on their area of practice, if they're performing procedures, you can, look at trend, outcome data trends, whatever for that particular specialty or area of practice would be the best or most recognized way to judge that physician or staff member's practice is what you're going to really want to be looking at. And that's something that the medical staff can really help the board with, is digging into that data and that information. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is a process for establishing privileges, and it can differ depending on the hospital, but you all actually have policies on this, and so it's worth, as board members, going and having a look at what those policies say and thinking about, are we following these? Do these make sense? Do they need to be revised? But this is sort of a quick and dirty summary of how the process typically works. So we start with the clinical department, who really knows that particular area of specialty, and they establish criteria by which it will be determined what the scope of privileges are. So important for what those criteria are going to be is they need to be objective, and they need to be based on recognized authority. We've talked a lot about authorities tonight, and they need to be consistent with your organization's quality goals. So those are some of the things you want to be thinking about when a department is setting criteria for who gets privileges and what the extent of those privileges are. So from there, applicants are then moved to the credentialing committee. So that's a group that's not specialized in one department, but across the members of the medical staff that are looking at applicants, see what their makeup is and whether they're okay to move to the next level, and then the medical executive committee level. So that's the group within the medical staff that is going to have a person who then interacts with the board. So the medical executive committee is going to be conducting a real review of what they're seeing in front of them. And one of the things that's worth noting at this level that can happen is, just like the board might be tempted to defer to the medical staff because they have areas of expertise, it can be tempting for members of the medical staff. And of course, we realize this is sort of a professional wanting to defer to your colleagues who have specialty in a particular area. So it can be tempting for members of the medical staff to want to defer to their colleagues who may have specialized knowledge in a particular area. But it's really important for everyone to bring their own critical thinking and review to the process. And so from the medical executive committee, then the applicants would advance to the board for a review and for the final decision. The medical executive committee is going to be making the recommendation. The board is going to be making the final decision. Okay, so that's process in a nutshell. You can go ahead and go on to the next slide.
This is
The last slide.
this is the next slide. It was on this. You're going back.
Oh, perhaps I was talking through the wrong slide. All right, sorry
Did I-
about that.
No.
Okay, criteria for privileges. Things to think about for privileges. wanting to make sure that they are specific to the physician that has that particular specialty. You should be worried if everyone has the same set of privileges. Even within a particular specialty, there may be physicians who should have broader privileges or scaled back privileges. I talked earlier about that physician who was performing laparoscopic surgery. There could be a physician with his, very similar academic background or training that may have enough experience with that particular surgery to be able to perform that surgery. This particular physician didn't have enough experience. So watching for those types of expanding or contracting the privileges based on experience. Okay, and then again, the medical staff departments are the ones that can recommend the criteria for their specialty. Okay, and I think with that, we're off to Dr. Kerr again.
All right. So, just before I go on, because it had come up just before we finished, and before I forget, in all decisions, the primary thing for the board and everybody in the hospital is what is best for the patient. So the considerations of the legal considerations are important, but they're subsidiary to everything that has to do with what's best for the patient. So this is a kind of the
thing before we proceed.
Sure.
I'm noticing that Julie has read on her paper. I don't have read on mine. I think several of us are missing the whole set of slides. So can we have access to those when you're done?
Oh yeah, you can even have the appendix I talked about earlier.
That would be
Yeah.
wonderful. Thank you. I'm furiously writing notes here to make sure I don't miss anything. So thank you.
So I think this is kind of a scary number here that, half of all of the credentialing that privileges and credentials that are approved probably are not adequately done. So we can go to the next one.
Of ambulatory, how about of hospitals?
Pardon?
That was just an ambulatory.
Right. I don't have a documentation for that, but it does just make the point. And I can say from my experience, because I do medical staff peer review around, and so I sit on I sit in a lot of executive committee meetings where these things are talked about. In some places, they even have me do credentials review as well as an outreach reviewer. I have no trouble believing that goes on, because in that sort of peripheral role, I pick this up a lot. This doesn't make sense, or this isn't consistent, or these two things aren't consistent. So I could easily believe that. So things are missing or required documentation. It's amazing the number. Sometimes these packages will get started and it takes a few months to get everything in, and it's amazing the amount of stuff that expires in the course of a package getting from the time it starts till it gets done. So just bear that in mind. Now, documentation of training, I don't see that as often, but I do see it. This one is really big, educational and work gaps. I mean, if you look through their history, and there's 3 months here and 6 months here, you need to make sure that you have a complete history of all the time that they've been working, because you see that a lot. This is the other one. So make sure, because I see these when I'm reviewing them, and they come and they really aren't complete. I mean, there's pieces that are missing out of those before they get to me to be done. And the other thing is peers. I get calls from to do peer for people who are applying for privileges other places, and because I've been associated with people in my role as a reviewer, or I knew these people 10 years ago when they were residents at Sacred Heart or whatever. I'm really not a peer in that situation. So make sure that the people, when they're peers, they really are peers. Next. Same sort of things apply to mid-level providers. Make sure that these things, that they are board eligible, they are board certified, particularly if you're re-credentialing people. Have they voluntarily opted not, they're getting near the end of their career and really don't want to, I'm going to practice 2 more years, I really don't want to, take that old board recertification thing. If your criteria are they have to be board eligible or board certified, they have to be that. Otherwise, you become part of that 50%. So bear that in mind. The last one is, so you grant this, but this is an ongoing process. Maybe they're only going to practice for a year or 2 at the end, and you might be tempted to say, well, we won't necessarily be quite as vigorous because we know they're going to be gone pretty soon. Don't let yourself fall into that trap. Next slide. Best practices, the scope of practice, make sure that what you're credentialing them for is what they actually do. If there's a procedure that they have previously been credentialed for, and they have privileges for, but they haven't done it in 3 years, well, it's not a particularly big problem. You just remove that privilege from their privilege list. Make sure that their qualifications are accurate, that they do have those board certifications or that additional training or whatever they need. And this is a big one. Make sure that the original sources, that you actually get it from the original sources themselves. Next. I would imagine you have a checklist of the documents that are required. I haven't actually seen it, but you want to make sure that all of those are actually filled in, and that the documents, as I said, are up to date, because they certainly fall out of date fairly frequently. This is really important. Know what your policies are. Know what your bylaws say. If you need something to help you sleep at night, you go and read through the bylaws. In terms of the policies and procedures for the board members, those are actually fairly short. The bylaws are really very long and they're very detailed, but it's important that you know what's in those, and particularly the policies are pretty quick and easy to get through. And here's the other one: is sufficient time for renewal. The way your policy is set up right now, people are notified a couple of months ahead. They have 30 days to get things in, and then there's 30 days for it to be reviewed and go to the board. That may not actually be enough time. That's pretty fast to turn these packages around. But, that is what your policies say right now. Next. These are warning things. If they have hesitation in getting permission, if they won't give specific information, this is a big one: voluntary or involuntary surrender of licensure, any limits or revocation of privileges. If you see those, and I do when I go through these packages, I imagine, Tim, you've probably seen that too. If you see those things, that is really a big red flag. And especially if you see it more than once, that's a really big red flag. In my mind, you would almost need to have extenuating circumstances to credential and privilege somebody who had that kind of thing in their file. Next. This one a lot, where people are going through, they've been in a lot of different places. They're here 6 months, they're here 4 months, they're here 8 months. I have a bit of a unique opportunity, because I do review charts for a lot of different critical access hospitals all over the state, and I see people kind of migrating from one critical access hospital to the next. And inevitably, not inevitably, but frequently when I've seen that, those are people whose charts have had serious questions about the medical care that they've been providing, and they've left the medical staff one place before they actually were removed from the medical staff. And so if you see that, I would really spend a lot of time going back to those original facilities and find out, why did they leave, what was going on, why were they only there 6 months. This one, I've never gone down in the weeds far enough to notice that, but having seen that, I'll pay more attention to it. And the number of professional liability cases, that's a really big red flag. I mean, if somebody practices for 40 years and has 1 or 2, that's not a, I mean, it's bad. Now, hopefully, it wasn't bad for the patients because it was an error in care, but that's not the red flag that the person who has 4 cases in 5 years brings up. And then any of this, I've seen over and over again substance abuse. I don't know that you can deny somebody if they've been in rehab and been trained and then overcome that. You can't deny that. But I have certainly seen cases where people who have had substance abuse problems, it becomes a problem in the future as well. So I don't think that's a reason not to put somebody on your staff, but it's certainly a reason to have your eyes and ears open when they're on your staff. Next. So know your bylaws, follow your bylaws, update them. Don't just re-credential, and be really thorough. I mean, when you get down in the weeds in some of these packages, you just find stuff. And then don't be pressured to just get it done. So, is that it? And the last one, so we kind of covered that. Make sure their documentation is complete. Follow up on the issues, old or new. Like I say, dig down. If they're moving from place to place in place, pick up the phone, call, have your credentialing staff pick up the phone, call, find out why is that going on. And remember, if you don't do this well, you're going to open up liability for yourself. So I think that's the end of my part.
That's it. Yeah.
So before we go to the Q&A, I think since we're at a public meeting, just to allow for public comment, and then we'll go to Q&A if that's all right. Because we usually allow that before we get too deep into the meeting. So this is a public meeting, and so if there are any members of the public who would like to speak, now's the time. We ask that you keep your comments, please, 3 minutes, and begin by introducing yourself with your name and address. Is there anyone here who would like to make a public comment at this time? Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt. We can take questions. Well,
I've got about 15, and I don't want to.
All right, you can't consolidate that into a few.
I can get it down to 5 or 6.
All right, I'll accept that.
Okay, I guess I'll start with my first question, and then I'll defer and come back to me. And that goes back to the board's liability if there is a lawsuit, particularly if a patient has been harmed and the board has credentialed a physician. Are we indemnified against that? Do we have insurance that indemnifies it? Is there no, are we financially, personally liable? I don't know the answer to that.
No, we have directors and officers liability insurance, and as long as you were operating as a director, as a board member, you would have coverage under that policy.
Okay, so I don't
these are not
worry about.
Yeah, these are not lawsuits where people are individually named.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a kind of a general question. So we talked about re-credentialing, and the scenario comes up if prior board approves someone for credentialing, it's come up for review, there's questions about that initial credentialing. How do you intercede and try to make a course correction if you feel like initial credentialing was not in the best interest of the patient or the hospital?
Yeah, in reappointment, you said the onus is on us to sort of make the case, but if it isn't, I mean, this.
What is the process? What's the best? What is the best practice to?
Unfortunately, once you credential them, now the onus is on you to prove that they're not practicing to standards, or they're putting people at risk, or their behavior is not appropriate, or whatever. Then it becomes based on what their practice is actually like.
There would have to be an incident.
Yeah, probably it'd have to be an incident.
So once we've accepted the package they've arrived with, we always accept that package. After that point, that's how we decide.
I mean, retrospectively, go back and say, we made a mistake. We should have never given you your privileges in the first place.
So,
yeah. I'm going to defer that to you, but I'm thinking that's going to be really hard to do.
Right. So I think a couple of things. One, if there's a practice problem, you shouldn't be finding it at the time. If there's a significant practice problem, re-credentialing is not the time that you should be finding that. You should be finding that while there's ongoing practice. All right. And so that's thing one. Thing two is in your medical staff bylaws, you have a process, and it's really, really important to follow that process. And if you follow the process, you will be in much better shape than if you don't. But you are, if you make an adverse decision about somebody's privileges or their ability to be on your medical staff, going to make that individual probably unhappy, and know that that may come with some exposure. You're going to have to balance that against the exposure that you're going to have if that person continues to practice at your facility.
In that, as a consequence of that, or follow up with that, I'm not going to name any names, but not too long ago, we were presented with the re-credentialing of a physician against whom there have been a number of care and service reports. We heard that patients felt jeopardized and patients who had to be cared for by supplemental physicians who had to come in and correct the mistakes of this particular doctor. And I was strongly uncomfortable with re-credentialing, but I was prevailed upon, the argument was made that if we don't re-credential, this person would get a black mark in the national database. And I ended up abstaining because I could not in good conscience vote yes. But in a circumstance like that, I'm hearing from you that the board may have been acted professionally improperly. We knew about these incidents, and they were well known and discussed.
Well, yeah.
Then we're hearsay.
Yeah, we have to be a little careful with this particular case. But let me. What I'm hearing is that yeah, we should be a little more vigilant, perhaps.
Yeah.
Let me come back to put a finer point on what Bob was asking a moment ago. Pointier point. Yeah, sharper. So, I mean, most of the members of the board here are fairly new. Okay, in one case, just an hour. So, what if the initial credentialing, the new, when we say we, when it comes up to reappointment, can't just change our mind about an initial credentialing. Well, it wasn't we, right? It was the board, right. But it wasn't us.
Right.
So, what is the the onus is on the board to say that something went wrong. But so can a new board during a reappointment process say we think the other board made a mistake and there are these issues? How does that work?
So let me say, you're the board, you get to decide whatever you want to decide. So
all right.
That's an easy answer in that, yes, you can decide what you want to decide. Now, the amount of legal exposure you have for making that decision is going to depend on the facts and circumstances before you. You're going to be, if you're seeing something that is really concerning and it's time to make a change, you need to follow your process that's in your medical staff bylaws, which protects that practitioner's rights. And if you follow that process that's in the bylaws and you make sure that you go through every step and you're documenting and you've got a good faith judgment that's backing up your decision, you should have some protection. Again, I'm not saying you're not going to get sued. That's always a possibility. That's, this is a healthcare, it's a high-risk endeavor. But there is a process for changing your mind if you follow what's in the medical staff bylaws and give that practitioner his or her due process.
Okay, thank you.
You guys asked all my questions.
Okay. Do you have anything?
I have one question, and it was the one that Liana asked at the beginning.
Liana has 12 more. Go ahead, Liana.
Hey, Julie, can I follow up on that?
Yeah,
so, just so I understand, if a physician was initially credentialed and there was something, this is 2010, there was something that happened in 2005. The board discussed it and decided to initially credential. Now we have a new board. It's 2014. We're re-credentialing, and they say, I don't like what happened in 2005. I never would have credentialed them, so we're not going to re-credential them.
Yeah, and that's where it's going to be really important to look at the facts and circumstances. If that person had an issue in 2005, they were granted privileges in 2010, it's now 2018 and nothing has happened that's of concern, and you decide to change that person's privileges or credential to practice, I think you're going to have a potentially tough uphill battle to show that you had a reasonable basis upon which to revoke the privilege or credential.
Well, it sort of depends what they did to
It could. That's a good point too. The thing is, with these conversations, it's so hard to give you a definitive answer because it's all going to be driven by the facts and circumstances of that particular case.
Well, one thing that seems pretty imperative is that we go back and look carefully at our policies and procedures and our bylaws. Maybe we could get new copies of those soon.
I was going to request that if, I don't know if the agenda has been set for our retreat, but if we could potentially touch on this at that time, it would be excellent. Please,
What are go ahead.
No.
Well, you brought up this, I guess we need to, I'm not sure this is a question for you, this may be a question for you guys, but we were debating about whether board eligible or board certified was necessary. Is there anything, remind me, is there anything in our policies that because we were debating whether that should be the case. Is that something we should be debating? Is it in black and white somewhere?
It's written, board eligible or board certified.
Okay.
And what board eligible means is you completed it basically, and been certified to have successfully completed it at a recognized official training.
Right. So if it says in black and white board eligible or board certified, then I guess we shouldn't have even had that debate, right? Because then board eligibility would be plenty, and we would be going contrary to the principles that we have in place. Require board
I think we
certification.
should have had that debate about whether we want to revise our policy. I know there's an issue that I have felt strongly about. To me, board certification, and some of this was naivete on my part, but board certification has always meant that you're up to date on quintessential elements that you need to be up to date on in practice. And I've subsequently learned that a lot of recertification involves high expenses and time for practitioners that in many ways they really don't want to engage in, and I understand that perfectly. I'm wondering if it might be appropriate to require board certification at the initial credentialing, and then at re-credentialing, not require that people be recertified. Now, that's my instinct to say, at the outset of your engagement with KDH, you are board certified. But down the road on your career, you don't have to keep recertifying. And then that would satisfy me. So that's what I want to propose.
We do have language in our policies of requiring initial board certification at some point. But in different specialties, it takes different length of time. And so one of us have to get privileges, assuming everything else is okay, based on board eligible. But there is language expressing initial completion of board certification,
Now,
which I think is a good thing.
Does board eligible preclude physicians who did their residencies outside the United States? Because my understanding is board eligible
There is
means
written
that-
reciprocity with some countries.
Okay. Be nice to know.
So Bob, do you have another question? I think we're taking care of that.
No, I think the key is, on reappointments, let's remember the burdens on the board, and that the patient's best interest is key.
Yeah.
Can I just, before we move on, in terms of the eligibility thing, to remember too is that you can allow your boards to lapse, and then you're no longer certified, and you will continue to be eligible for some window of time. And some people towards the end of their careers just decide, I'm within 2 years of retiring, but now my eligibility is going to end. So that's where it particularly might get more sticky for you guys, is that, well, I want to practice 2 more years, but I don't want to spend $1,500 for a test and take this because I'm only going to do this for 2 more years.
And that's mostly the kinds of cases that we confronted where people at the end of their career don't want to go through that, and I'm sympathetic to that I used to.
What do you find another in that scenario at other places? How do they handle it?
they violate their policy.
It's
to their own legal liability. And the other thing is, when you bring up, if you become ineligible after 5 years, so you took your recertification, like in internal or like in the ER, it's every 10 years. So if I took that 10 years ago, and then I got a 5-year window after that, and I'm 15 years out since the last time I was certified. Maybe I'm still doing good medicine. Hopefully the people who are watching the department know that I'm still doing good medicine. But in particularly smaller places where maybe you're 1 or 3 people or something and nobody's going to go against their friend, it really breaks down.
Well, to go back to your point of when in doubt, always remember what's best for your patients. Period. Even if that violates your own policies.
Well, that's what we were struggling with, because some of us thought that what's best for patients is that we were certification. And we had to be, we had to learn about this. Yeah, may have been learning.
Yes, can you briefly explain the difference between ambulatory and full privileges? And is there any difference in the expectation of preparedness for credentialing between those 2 levels of participation?
Well, typically, the credentialing, the privileges will be different. They'll just be a different set of privileges that are outlined on it. The credentialing has all of these things you can or can't, that you can do. That you check off, I want to do that, I want to do that, or the core privileges include all of this. So that's usually, it would be site facility specific based on what your credentialing committee had rolled into a privileging package.
Could you briefly explain? I understand full privileges. Ambulatory means that physicians can do and can't do what?
The ambulatory medicine is like walk-in medicine, it's like clinic medicine. It's urgent care. It's not, hospital inpatient care. It's not ER care.
So if you think of it, oh, sorry.
No, I can speak to that from the standpoint. When in the last few years I practiced at Heart, we had our acute care area, and then we had our intermediate care area. In the intermediate care area where I finished out my career, there were certain things we didn't take care of. Unless it ended up in the wrong place, we didn't take care of acute strokes or acute MI or multi-trauma, that major traumas, those kind of things. And those were just outlined in the
So if you think of it as that job description that I talked about before, the privileges, the job description for somebody who's delivering more complicated inpatient care as an internist is going to be really different than the job description for somebody who's going to be only working in a clinic on an outpatient basis, right? The patients are less complicated.
And that's a basic difference. Ambulatory is basically active means in hospital.
Okay, I thought we were talking about that today. Did you get your question answered?
So Erica has another question.
Right, thank you. So if a provider is board certified and then you said if that lapses, then they become board eligible for a period of time. If that lapses, how would they go about reestablishing their...
They have to go all the way back through residency.
I'm sorry.
They have to go back through residency.
I did not know that.
That got their attention, didn't it?
Has anyone ever done that? Gone back through residency?
I'm sure somebody has, but I'll tell the truth.
Okay, well that's...
This is why you don't want to let that happen, unless you're going to be done practicing.
So I have a question, maybe Dr. Brian knows this right off his hand. So there's an initial appointment, credentialing, which is provisional, and that's for a year, right? So they can practice, and then what if you find out during that year that this wasn't a good fit? We found out more information, and we're coming up for reappointment. This person, then you're back to this, like, a pretty confrontational situation.
Document.
Yes, and follow your medical staff bylaws. It is so important. I cannot underscore how important that is. This is an area of law where if you're not following, because if you think of, once a physician or a practitioner has that credential or set of privileges, think of that as a property right. The law really looks at it that way. And so if you're going to take away somebody's property right, you've got to give them legal due process. And that's what you find in your medical staff bylaws. So even if it's only been a year, and you've conferred that property right on them, you need to follow that process. And like Dr. Kerr said, document the heck out of it so that you've got, you know, your good faith determination, you know, ready to go if there's ever a challenge. It could be hard, right? Sorry, just one thing. It could be hard. But if you consider the alternative, right, if we're thinking about what's best for patients, you know, that it's worth doing the hard part.
We did update our bylaws 4 years ago, and we had legal teams on both representing the hospital and the medical staff, and we went back and forth alterations in the wording and substance for a year before we got it finalized.
I'm not surprised.
And the main addition at that time is protection of the practitioners.
Right.
How often are the bylaws revised? As needed? Are the bylaws revised as needed or on a set schedule?
No. No, we are in the process. I mean, I'm actually midway in the process of updating it. And we hope to have them updated by this summer.
And it's a really good point that we just heard, which is representation for the hospital side and the medical staff, because y'all work together all the time, right? But this process of taking away this property right it's adversarial by design. And so when you're writing the process by which you're going to confer that property right or take it away, you know, it's really important the perspective of each side goes into creating that process. That it's not just the medical staff and it's not just the hospital, that it's balanced. And so when those medical staff bylaws are updated, y'all are going to want your own teams reviewing them from each side.
We had an intense experience of
It sounds like
applying those things.
Yeah.
It worked well.
When the bylaws are updated, do those immediately apply to all providers, or are providers grandfathered under the bylaws in which they were originally credentialed?
No. They become current anyway.
Deanna, do you think you can?
I don't have any more questions.
Okay, can I just add
Yeah, go ahead.
one more thing? If I remember what it was.
So glad I'm not the only one.
Sorry.
Peer review, though, is not the process necessarily by
And
which
that
you...
did remind me of the answer.
Okay.
Go ahead. But is
No,
it-
but peer review is distinct from an investigation that your bylaws
Yes.
dictates, where you would
Yes.
document then your findings and maybe change someone's
And
privileges. or
that
credentials.
might be rolled into, you know, the peer review process over the last 12 months, showed this, and this. The thing I was going to offer was, if there's concerns about a provider's care or behavior or whatever, it shouldn't be coming up when it's time for credentialing.
Right.
Somewhere along the way, that should have been
Yeah.
noted, and there should be a paper trail before you get to the re-credentialing
That was,
process.
And it can be found during peer review.
But
right?
then forwarded on,
Yes,
right? You don't
exactly.
use the documentation
That's right.
from peer
That's
review
right.
as your evidence.
That's right.
Can you restate what was just said there?
Yeah.
Just because this sounds really
Peer review is a
important.
quality improvement process, and so you don't want that to be your documentation of your findings of why you're not giving someone credentials or not re-credentialing them.
Because
Peer
that's
review,
protected
it's
information.
protected, and so you're releasing the privilege of that document.
Independent findings.
Well, so peer review could say, gosh, medical executive committee, we have some concerns and we think you need to investigate these instances, but they have to investigate it and document independently of peer review, or the peer review findings are then open to discovery and litigation.
Yes.
Right?
So you're saying
Well
you can't
said.
say,
Very well said.
oh, we've got this peer review that suggests that there's a problem. That's our evidence.
Right.
Gotcha.
That's my understanding.
No, you
Well, that-
stated
that-
exactly right.
Then the MEC has to do its own independent
Yes.
investigation.
Which is dictated by the processes and the bylaws.
That
Correct.
makes perfect sense. Yeah.
And
You
I
got
would,
it.
and I would advocate, as long the board as it is, if you haven't read through this process and the bylaws, take the hour it takes to do that, just to get familiar with it.
We need to do that.
Well, in your assessment, you had both available to you. I mean, you said our policies and our bylaws really are in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that they are. I mean, I think, you know, they're always, sounds like maybe you're 4 years in, maybe one more year, or you're already underway with a review, but keeping them current is good. And making sure that what's in there you're actually following. That's always a good thing to go back. And I think your policies are solid. It's just, you know, are we doing all these things that we said we're going to do?
There's a question back here.
I had a comment when I heard you.
Okay,
Uploads to credentialing.
yeah, go ahead.
Peer review is meant to be protected.
Yes.
The way we get physicians to participate in it is by telling them that it's protected and that it's a safe process, that we're trying to improve their performance. If you make peer review, if it becomes widely known that the board is using peer review as a recruitment system for decredentialing people, participation in peer review will die completely. It's the opposite of a culture of safety, where you're trying to get people to do the right thing by changing the systems and changing their behavior. If they link peer review to a punitive process that results in decredentialing, the value of peer review will be destroyed.
I wouldn't worry about that. I don't think anyone's suggesting that we do that. And certainly, I think that the peer review will inform more what happens at other levels of this process.
That begs the question, though, if we have a concern, how do we initiate that investigation aside from peer review?
And how do we get the evidence? How do we get the evidence if we have a concern?
Actually, that is well spelled out. So, again, if you begin to look at the disciplinary process, it's very clearly spelled out how a concern is raised, who investigates that concern, who sits to review that concern, what role the board has in reviewing that, how a hearing board is appointed, and that has to be separate from the investigatory board. It's a very detailed, complicated, step-by-step process built on providing the practitioner due process.
Is it spelled out?
Is
it spelled out the threshold of concerns that need to be reached before an investigation is initiated, or the quality of the concerns?
No, what's spelled out is the process by which the rights of the practitioner and the rights of the board are both protected.
So what I'm getting at here is, let's say that there have been 2 patient reports, very different concerns, 1 practitioner. At what point is the threshold met that there might be a serious concern here that we need to investigate? My concern is that we'd have just reports piling up, but no procedure then. There's no threshold that says, okay, we've met this threshold, we have this staff or this degree of concern. How do we know when it needs to be investigated?
Again, I think without the specifics, without a specific example, it's always hard to kind of see where the gray line is going.
I feel like
this hospital,
should be something very clear.
Yeah, but I would challenge that it's always going. I mean, you could predefine. This is clearly bad. This is clearly good, but there's always going to be these things in the gray area that are very difficult to figure out.
Yeah, there's judgment involved.
But what we have found in this hospital is that our peer review process is, I believe, really good, really solid. And when peer review has brought concerns to the NBC in the past, the NBC tends to consider that pretty seriously.
So
my concern, though, I'm very sensitive enough to hear these concerns that we don't want that to be associated with further punitive or with any punitive action. I think they should be completely independent of each other. And if there are concerns brought up that somebody's performing laparoscopic cholecystectomy on obese patients and they shouldn't be because they don't have the experience, at what point does that warrant an investigation?
As chief of surgery, I bring that directly to the NBC and recommend that for review.
So you really have kind of parallel processes. Again,
yes.
The peer review process, remember, is a review of a lot of different cases. What percent we have? What, 70, 60%? 80% appropriate care. So we review a lot of cases where there isn't a problem, but we say no. We think the care was appropriate.
You know, one thing that might help here is to think about it in terms of there are facts. Facts reside in the medical records, right? And you might look at the medical records in the peer review process, which absolutely should be protected, should be sacred. That is not something that should generate evidence for something that may percolate up through a disciplinary process and result in loss of privileges or credentials. That needs to be protected. What happens in that sphere, though, is creation of documents and discussions that take place, and those stay in the quality improvement or peer review box. However, the set of facts that went into that peer review box is the same set of facts that can go up through the disciplinary process. They need to be separate tracks, and they need to be distinguished from one another in order to, as we heard earlier, preserve that culture of safety, which is just as important as the other, making sure that you're paying attention to getting bad actors moved along and out of the system.
Well, I can appreciate that a peer review might drive a further investigation. To me, it sounds like that's the tool we are relying on for investigation.
No. The case drives.
Okay. I just wondered, just based on past, it seems to me that that's what I was being told, and I was hoping that that was not the case.
Yeah, no. I mean, we've had summary suspensions of providers in this hospital.
Without a peer review?
Without a peer review, because the behavior was egregious enough and raised enough alarms that the chief of staff at that time said, Paul, we're putting a stop to this. You need an evaluation. You're not coming back to work here until that evaluation is complete. And so that's a very different process than a process where you're hoping to coach your provider into how to more effectively communicate or prevent an adverse outcome that may have mistakenly created without
So I think we have some things that we need to do, review the bylaws, and I think we can have some conversations among ourselves about this process. Maybe just one more question for our guests, and then we can move on, Erica.
So I have one more question that I forgot I'd written down on another page. So when we credential a provider and they have their list of their privileges, so their scope of how they're going to practice, I imagine that changes as they become more experienced and they gain more privileges ever?
No.
Without coming for us?
Not unless they have some further training and so forth. And that came up with Bill Walton, by the way. He voluntarily took a week-long training program in bronchoscopy, but he had not previously been privy to that. So when he came back from that training and had a certificate and had performed enough procedures, we granted him the privilege to do bronchoscopy on a separate application.
Did that come before the board?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Just want to make sure we're granting things not a part one for future.
Okay. Well, thank you for the presentation. Thanks for coming. Let's thank our guests for coming. All right. Okay. Next, we have reports and dashboards, and with regard to quality, we do have a couple of action items here. So please pay attention to that, Mandy.
Yeah. So my report is in the packet. I want to add a couple things to the report, and then that are not written there, because the majority of it is these the CWAPI, or that we have action items for. But the first thing I wanted to say is that we had an update from Jackie Dawson, the regional epidemiologist, and her summary is that for Washington State, there's good news that influenza-like illness and positive flu rates are dropping 19% in week 6, so that's good. She just sent this out today. And that flu-associated deaths were still in individuals greater than 65 years old. She also said that the RSV rate continues to decline, so that's one of those influenza-like illnesses. The bad news is that rhinovirus is increasing. So you may hear people still saying, oh, I'm sick, and it may not be flu. It might be a common cold. So I just wanted to give you an update on that. We have had, I think, 176 deaths so far.
176 what?
Deaths
From the flu?
here, not here.
I know.
No, that's Washington State.
Washington
That's
State.
Washington State.
But that's not, that's a normal trend, right?
Compared to last year, there was 176. Or no, as of 227, actually. So less this year at the same point in time. There's been, the majority are greater than 65. There's been one death from 0 to 4 years, none in the 5 to 24-year-olds, and 6 in 25 to 49-year-olds, 30 in the 50 to 64-year-olds, and 139 greater than 65. And we have had, I think it says 2 deaths. So that's that update. I also I have 2 WSNA nurses that work in my office, and they have this this magazine in our office, and opened it up, and there's this thing about their 2017 Union Leadership Conference, and there's this awesome picture of our KVH nurses wearing their KVH shirts at their union conference. I just thought that was really cool, and so I wanted to just show you that. I was really proud of them. They were so proud of hats. Yeah, they're handkerchiefs. So the rest of what I had is in the packet. There is this most recent dashboard. So that goes through December of 2017. The summary's there. If anyone has any questions.
Yeah, so any questions about the data summary, the dashboard? Any questions? Okay.
And then there were a few additional pieces of data in there that I think are just, readmission data keeps coming up here, and so we were really pleased. We recently received this packet from Qualis about our performance with readmission, and we're really doing very well compared to others. And this is the metric that medical staff had asked to put on the new dashboard. So I really think that's worth looking at, noting if you didn't take a peek at that.
Right, so for example, if you look on page 21 of the packet, this gives the 30-day readmission. Right?
Yep.
You can see us over there to the left.
Purple.
Yeah.
Well below the state and national average, and 4th out of critical access hospitals. So.
Anything else in this in the performance report that you want to call our attention to?
What?
That's not just critical access, that's all of us. Oh, no, I'm sorry, the graph above it is, you're right.
So I'm not sure this is the appropriate moment in Mandy's overall report, but at the QI Council on Monday?
Last
It
Monday.
was a Monday.
Go Live Monday it was.
The 12th. Recent. Was it last Monday? February 12th. February 12th. I wanted to call out an exceptional performance by Linda Navarro, who gave us a really detailed, really substantive risk management review. Linda, that was just outstanding. You need to be acknowledged for the quality of that work.
And it's included in the packet.
And it's right there.
And now she's going to want a higher salary.
Given the many hats she wears.
That's why we bring Liz.
Any questions about reports, about performance data, anything before we go to the next?
I really like these concepts. It's really easy to
This performance report, this is sort of standard the way they set it out.
The Qualis report?
Yeah.
I mean, that's good too, but I talked about
Oh, you were talking about
our usual
hers.
ones that
Okay.
I appreciate. They're just so easy to
Well,
see
that's
at
Amy
once.
Diaz, too.
Oh,
So
okay.
she's amazing, too.
Any other questions before we move to the next point?
go then to the action items.
Yeah, so the 2 action items, go ahead and introduce what we're looking at.
So the first thing here is the Quality Assessment and Performance Improvement Program Policy.
That starts on page 48.
Yes. And this is something we're required to have by RCW and WAC. And it, one of the key functions of the board is to oversee the quality of care at QVH. And so this policy helps direct how that happens. And how what's changed really is not very much. Some of it's just terminology. This QAPI term, Quality Assessment Performance Improvement, is a CMS term that, it's the newest term. It used to be QI or quality assurance, or there's all different terms. But this is in line with CMS, and that's why that term is in there. Other changes, go ahead.
Sorry, no, I'm stepping on your toes here. We and then they changed it obviously to match our mission and vision that we put in place. So the changes really were reflecting kind of the change in reality in terms of terminology and in terms of mission and vision. Sorry, Mandy, go ahead.
No, you're fine. And so there was one other change, was that we're going to, and I'd like to actually ask to amend the policy, to take off the patient and family advisor. But fortunately, in your board application process, we found an incredible applicant for a patient family advisor. She's actually here. Judy Love has agreed to be our patient and family advisor. And so I'd like to amend this policy to keep that back out there.
So on page 51 of your packet, at the very bottom there, the patient family advisor had been removed, and we'd like to amend that.
We had searched for 2 years for a patient and family advisor and hadn't gotten it, so I had finally taken it off. But
Very briefly summarize the duties of the person.
Shoot, I don't know if I brought the job description, but it's really to help bring the patient perspective into the quality work we're doing and remind us of the patient point of view. I don't know if I've mentioned before that I'm really interested in patient and family engagement across the organization, but I think that a patient on QI Council could really help us meet those objectives. There is a job description. It's a volunteer position, and there's a job description that goes with it. So it's a 2-year commitment, which Judy has agreed to do. And she has a ton of, you've interviewed her, but she has a ton of great experience that I think is just a perfect match for QI Council.
So she'll be attending those meetings.
Yes.
Wonderful.
So let me just really quickly follow Robert's Rules of Order. Since there's an amendment to this, we would, I believe, want to vote on the actual amendment itself. We'd have to move to the thing to be put forward.
So I move the restoration of the patient and family advisor to the QI Council.
That's fine. All right, any second?
I'll second.
All right, good. Okay, all those in favor of the amendment to this, let's go with the motion. Say aye.
Aye.
Okay, good. All right, so as she mentioned, this is policy. I think we reviewed this at QI Council, and QI Council liked it and think that all the changes make sense. So QI Council and the 2 board members who are on QI Council are recommending approval of this. Are there any questions about the policy for Mandy?
I would just like to say that I'm appreciative for all of the hard work that goes into putting these together, and the detail, the eye for detail for amending them, figuring out what's relevant and what needs to be added or removed. I don't have that skill. I'm very glad you do.
Well, I had great versions to start with when I started in my role, great predecessors in quality, so that helped. But yeah.
So the actual appointment of Judy to the QI Council, that would be done by the council itself?
We could do that. It was done through a volunteer HR process, but before. But
well, I was just curious.
It hasn't happened in 2 years.
That's
so
nothing that the board needs to do.
I don't believe so.
Are there any questions or comments about the QAPI policy? I love saying that.
It's a weird word.
Should name it dog.
It just sounds so happy. It's Quappy.
Of the copy policy.
Okay, Leon makes motion, second. Okay, Bob, second. Any discussion? All those in favor of the QAPI policy, say aye. 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 Okay, that's unanimous. All right, then next we have the QAPI plan, which is separate from the policy. That starts on page 55 of your packet. Mandy, you want to say?
Well, as the policy states, directs, the board is responsible for approving the plan annually for how we will do quality assessment performance improvement each year. So the two top pages, page 55 and 56, really are very high level, right, and board level, thinking about what we're going to do next year. And behind that, though, are the individual measures that departments are going to be working on for their plans. And on top of this, there's all the other work we're doing with business plans, and we measure tons of things anyway. But what this is our recommendation about what we should focus on at the highest level, what individual departments will be focusing on for their QAPI plan, and those that they're recommending be on a dashboard as well. So people might measure things in their department and look at them internally, but it doesn't necessarily need to be on a board level dashboard. So behind the list of measures is the proposed dashboard, which includes a patient satisfaction section, a specific patient satisfaction section. And then the last piece in there is a glossary that we've used before to kind of help give you a reference to the individual measures that are recommended for the dashboard. But I'm happy to talk about all of them as well.
So the recommended dashboard is page 73 through 76. Am I correct?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, 3 pages.
You see that there's a patient satisfaction dashboard on here too.
That's part of it.
Say anything about that?
Well, one of the things I would just point out is that the data's not very stable, right? It bounces all over the place, and that's one of the struggles I've had with this data all along, is there's small numbers of people that can change where you lie on here really easily. But I think it's important that you get to see that department level view, because when we had it just grouped together as a hospital, something might be going on in the ER that's affecting all the scores, and it just was really hard to see anything. So I'm excited that we have it at this level. I think there's going to be much more work that goes on at the individual department and individual measure level that you just can't show here. But I'm really excited that we have this view, so you can start looking at how it swings so wildly, and kind of hopefully we'll see some improvement.
Now, one of the things I found most interesting when on the QI Council, on page 56, they list the focused improvements for 2018. That's striving for 0 surgical site infection rates, decreasing falls, timeliness referrals, and so on. We talk about patient satisfaction and willingness to recommend, and the patient family engagement, which you mentioned a moment ago, and then maintaining documentation standards with the new EHR. So those are, I think that this is really, it's a good document, and I think that the improvements they're focusing on for 2018 make a lot of sense. And so, yeah, the QI Council reviewed this as a whole, and then the 2 board members on the QI Council were, Leon, I'll speak for you. We were very supportive of what they're doing here. So the idea would be that the board would approve this plan for 2018. Are there questions about the dashboard or anything else, Bob? Do you have any questions about the dashboard?
So I see the proposal of surgical site and proposed days to referral clinics.
Yes.
Right, so on the referral to clinics, how's that? I mean, are you saying this is our standard? It's going to be
Yeah.
2 days and we're going to measure that? What are your thoughts on that, Carrie?
Yeah, that's absolutely what we had talked about, is setting our target and looking at our processes and meeting those targets around not only the incoming referrals, but also referrals going out.
So just so you know, through the process, like I've been meeting with Carrie and her team, and they said, here's the things we want to work on, and it was discussion about, and they said, we want this on this should be on the dashboard.
Fantastic.
So it wasn't just me sitting off by myself saying, I think they should measure this and they have to work on this. This is something they want to work on.
What is dyspnea?
Shortness of breath, difficulty breathing.
So, yeah, any other questions for Mandy about the...
Well, meaningful use. What do you? What's the proposal there? Are you just tracking dollars?
Well, no. So with Cerner, we actually have some much that we hope. I mean, we've seen some of it, and it looks like it's a lot better. But we think we're going to have some great ways that we can measure our compliance with meaningful use on a more ongoing basis. So we want to hold that spot there because we think we're going to have something really nice we can use, but we're not sure what that looks like exactly yet.
Other questions about the dashboard or about the plan itself? Hearing none, then do I have a motion regarding the quality plan?
I'll move to approve.
Erica makes a motion to approve. We have a second. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the quality assessment performance improvement plan? I know. Otherwise, that's easy. Please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, vote is unanimous. Thank you very much, Mandy. Anything else?
No.
Okay. Thanks for all your work on that. Okay, next CEO report from Julie Peterson.
Yeah, I just want to tell you that we gave Mandy a really bad time about taking pages 14 through 80 in the packet. And she thinks that represents the right balance. I'll be happy to answer any questions from my CEO report, but I did want to introduce Marcus Jaffe, who's waiting manufacturer. He's the new director of rehab services. And we feel real fortunate. Marcus was with us before the transition, and Rehab Vision identified him very early on as someone that they wanted to pull up as a leader. So, Marcus, is there anything you want to add?
So you'd be interested to know that I actually started here as a volunteer in 2006 in the rehab department. And I graduated from Central and I left a little bit to UW, but when I came back I was real excited to become part of the KVH team. And we're all looking forward to working together and looking forward to help the community with all the rehab needs.
And you started working at KVH when?
Well, if you guys know Mary Burke, she cornered me and said, you're now hired as an aide. You're no longer volunteering. So that was in 2006.
Oh.
And then I started here in 2015 as a PT. So.
I think, I mean, I was really happy to hear about having an internal, taking that on. So I'm glad that that was able to work out.
Thank you.
Full circle.
It is full circle. That's right.
I just have a couple updates, but I did want Jack to take some time. You might have heard that we went live on Cerner on February.
I heard something about that.
And Jack has all the details, so.
Well, I'll be brief. So we went live with Cerner, that's true, February 12th. We're in our second week now. Overall, I would say we're a success, judging by the reactions of ambulatory physicians, comparing us to other go-lives, the number of issues that we've had, and we've had our share of issues, there's no question about that, but the amount of effort that we've had across the organizations All of my colleagues, all of the teams, everybody has been so dedicated to that, and that's why we're a success, I would say. I would say the team that's been here from Cerner has been really helpful, and also the staff that I've hired to help support us has been extremely helpful. And I think that is the main driver of our success that we've had. There's been a lot of questions. It's a new way of doing things. The workflow is different. It's, as Dr. Noyes likes to say, it's physician-centered. There's a little bit more work for non-provider staff, but at the end product, we have a better medical record. And
physicians-centered as opposed to?
Well, I think McKesson was probably kind of both, really, physician and non-physician. I mean, there are different orders and so forth. But a lot of the content, a lot of the drivers of how we document, and I carried nodding vertically on that, is physician-centered, and it's just a different way of doing things. So there's a lot of things we discovered. It's kind of you don't know what you don't know. There is no way to test every possible scenario. There's no way to test every possible patient or a situation. So we're finding new things. We're asking questions. How does it work when this happens? A lot of training issues, a lot of just questions of how should we do this. There's some shares of things that aren't built correctly, as there are in every go live, and we're dealing with those as we go. I could talk about some very key issues that we're struggling. We're not struggling. We're working through. One is order sets. Order sets are not quite the way we want them to be, and so we're having some interdisciplinary discussions about that to make sure we're all on the same page of what our order sets should be. Getting our labs correct so we can charge them and result on them correctly, and we're reviewing that. I know we struggled a little bit with the item master for charges, and I think we've worked through that issue now. So. And the last one is the interfaces, and I've talked to now about 3 go lives. That's a common issue with interfaces not working exactly. Again, we can't test every patient, so we're struggling a little bit with that, and we're at the tail end of that, so we're resolving the interfaces as well. Interfaces are messages, basically messages the glue that glues all of the applications together. So applications in any healthcare organization talk to each other through a protocol called HL7, which is nothing important. But the fact that applications talk to each other and the way they message, for instance, when a patient is admitted, when a patient is discharged, if a lab is ordered or resulted, are the most common types of messages. So all of that triggers different things to happen. A label's printed, for instance. A discharge summary is sent to an external physician, an admit notice, all kinds of things. You're faxed or they're sent. We have some special interfaces with some of our partners. CHCW comes to mind. We have an interface that they put their lab orders in electronically, and we send them back electronically. And there's a lot of nuances to make that happen with 2 different EMRs matching that.
Is the interface a way of translating between the 2 then?
Sometimes there's translation, sometimes it's straight messaging. In that case, there's translation. There's a lot of development work and crosswalking between the 2. Sometimes it's just sending a message and having that receiving system do something. So we have internal interfaces between our own systems, and we also have interfaces with external systems. And all of those need to be moved over from our old Paragon system and NextGen for that matter, mostly Paragon, to Cerner. So for the most part, they're working, and they're working well. So we've had a couple struggles with that, but we're working through those.
I would just say there's a lot of really tired people around here. The energy has been, people have been so positive that even though people are tired and we're in week 2, they're talking about how in 6 months this is going to be great. And this is hard right now, but we are hearing a lot of positive things about the story that the EHR is telling, and they're going, this is going to be worth it. We just need to get through this.
The more I hear about the implementation, the initial energy and then the sustained energy that's required in 6 months, it would be better. It reminds me of new parenthood.
There's chocolate.
2
milk.
weeks. It's 2 weeks in, that baby is crying.
That is a very apt metaphor, actually.
I think they cost about the same too. Any questions for Jack regarding?
So, comment and a question. One is, I mean, I've heard it's a bit hard, but I've also heard that there's never been a sense of collaboration amongst the staff trying to help each other out through this difficult time, which is amazing, right? So it is about the people.
I see that every day.
Yeah.
I see the collaboration. We just met today. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of dedication across the entire hospital.
Yeah, we've got people who've gone way above and beyond what time and money does, and really stepped up. The question I have is, are we getting payments yet? Money going through?
It's a little early. It's payments. But charges are dropping. Charges are dropping. I think we have had some claims. I can't tell you honestly if they've actually gone out yet. But you think about it, sometimes it takes a while to even get the charges onto a bill to go out. We are excited though. We've actually seen revenue generated by departments. We're seeing a report daily that's showing by department, and I think our average daily revenue is, I think, 348,000 averaged over a year. And when we looked for the first several days, there were some bumps around. There was
$3 million
she's got to tell the story. Yeah,
She keeps taking that.
I know. We discovered some issues with quantity ordered and generated a $3 million pharmacy charge, which we did take off. That wasn't really appropriate.
NASA is not conducting a separate drug.
Right. Yeah, but I guess the upshot is that we are generating, we're seeing that revenue. But you're right, the next step is make sure it goes all the way through. And we've had some bottlenecks that we've identified and working on. So,
if I recall correctly, the legacy charges are being completed through the whole system.
Yes, and we hired a firm to come in and do that, to take care of the legacy AR for both NextGen and Paragon, simply because we want our billing staff to focus on the new system. It's just, to be straddling both systems is just not a good thing to do.
Yeah, no, I mean, I hear from a lot of folks, and good job. I mean,
yeah.
It's hard, but it's...
I hope next month I can tell you a bill went out and got paid. How's that sound? It's a good goal. That'll be the goal.
Additional questions for Jack specifically? Thanks a lot. Any questions for Julie or Julie? Any additional?
I have some more notes here, and I'll be brief. But at the beginning of the year, we also changed our employee engagement survey process, and we went to something called the Bank Pulse. And I asked Carrie Youngblood just to make a brief presentation about that. I think we're on our fourth question. I will say, though, that on February 12th, we rolled out the question, are you happy in your job? We won a mulligan on that one. So.
It was still okay.
That was a bold move.
Yeah.
It was. So,
we had a lot of comments.
As you all know, we transitioned over to Tiny Pulse January 10th, and we are indeed on our fourth question right now. We've been averaging about 28% participation, which is relatively low, but I think it will pick up. We've been a little distracted with some pretty major projects going on, so I think it will pick up. But over the course of that 28% participation, we've also received about 63 different unique suggestions. And we've also, the part that's been the most popular, Cheers for Peers, which I've mentioned before, is that social media-esque wall where people can send kudos to each other. And we've received an overwhelming 536 unique cheers for peers. So that part has just absolutely taken off. Just to give you a quick idea, so our very first question was, what's the one thing that we do very well here that we should continue doing or do more of? That was a free text question that really kind of generated a word cloud. And some of the bigger items on that were staff, care, patients, employees. So that it with a word cloud, those are a little more difficult to quantify and get metric on. Question 2 is, how would you rate the communication between you and your direct manager?
We average as an organization 7.7. The industry benchmark is 8.2, but the overall across everything benchmark is 7.7. So pretty happy with that one. And then the infamous question that came out on the day of Go Live: how happy are you at work? Industry average for that one is 7.3, and we came in at 6.8.
Did you say this is out of 0 to 10 scale?
Yes, I had to think about that. Yes, we did. But I wanted to also give you some examples of some of those responses or cheers for peers, so some specific ones. One of the specific responses we got was, I am happy because I have amazing coworkers on night shift here on MedSurg, and I love my boss. That's pretty cool. Another response that I thought was neat is, and you'll like this one, Jack. Yes, it is stressful at times with Cerner implementation, but I love working here and being a part of all the good work being done and to take care of our patients. Some specific cheers, so these are peer-to-peer sending each other something. So somebody sent something to someone and they said, thank you for everything you do in our department, exclamation point. You're doing a fabulous job and we love you. Another cheer was, you were such a pleasure to work with, such a kind person with such a special soul. So glad to know you and to be able to work with you. So it's really been pretty inspiring to see some of these comments come through. It's really cool.
How many cheers for peers have
536.
Remind me how this works, the platform, how it's viewed, how they're notified, how does that?
Right.
Yeah, can we pull it up? Yeah.
I have to log in and I don't know how my password.
It goes out in email, and there's a link on the email, and you follow that to the question, and it's really easy to pick. And then it takes you to a page where you can make suggestions, make comments, or do the cheers for peers.
And so is the peer notified then?
Yes.
Is it like tag them?
Yep.
They get it.
Then-
You've been cheered.
Yes.
Then you can see the feed for the whole organization too, so you can see
Who's been cheered?
who's been cheered.
I think it's in
The
GIFs.
cheering.
Yeah.
So it's really fun. It's very social media looking. And it's really, we had a current program we call Kudos cards, which are a hard handwritten card. And we're averaging much less than probably 100 a month or so on that because they are handwritten. So we have far exceeded that tapping, pat each other on the back aspect with going electronic than we did handwritten. So our next question, or a question that's out right now, I thought you guys might want to know, is what is one thing you wish the organization was asking you? What's one thing you wish we were asking you about? So that went out yesterday. It's a free text one, and I'm pretty interested to see what types of questions we get back.
Let's get these.
That did go out yesterday.
That's not the question.
I lied then. That's great.
Sorry. Something did go out yesterday.
Good.
It was a different relationship with your yes, your relationship with your coworker.
So will we hear the results?
This just in, apparently the question I just told you was asked was not the question that has gone out. No, there will not be results for that. But when that question does go out, I'll be very happy to share the results. I'm
How
sorry.
do you feel about your coworkers?
Yes.
How do you feel about your coworkers?
How would you
That
rate
one-
your colleagues and team members?
Okay.
That's right.
I think you're great.
And this is a scale, not a.
It's this one's a scale of 1 to 10.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Any last questions for Sharon?
No, but that was so.
I killed it.
Good feelings.
So
Julie?
very quickly, Libby and I talked to you when we were purchasing the Medical Arts Center about a suggestion we were looking into about setting up an LLC in order to house that. I just wanted to close the loop. We determined with Richard that we were not, that there was no advantage to doing that, so we won't be doing that. I also, in terms of that building and Radio Hill, we have the invitation to bid that's going out on Radio Hill. The bid period will be open through the 22nd. On the 22nd at 10:05, they will be open, and I believe that is here. And we will qualify the parent low bidder over the course of the following week, and hopefully have that bid to bring to you at your March meeting on 3/29. So we hope to get that done. On MAT 1, which is the about 2,200 square foot Sheldon space on the first story, design is underway. We're looking at having so we'll follow the same milestones. We're looking at having a cost estimate and a resolution to go to bid at 3/29. The bid period will go to bid in mid-April. Bid period will be April to early May, and we hope to have bid reviews. That's the May 24th. So move-in is still looking at Radio Hill like June or July, and hopefully on the MAC, if you decide that this is the process you want to, that we're going to build this out now, will be July, August. So we're moving forward on those. The health department is completing their community health needs assessment, and Amy Diaz is helping sort through that data. There's a group of community providers that are going through it. Robin Reed and I have been talking about presenting to this board sort of a hospital-centric version of that, and I wondered if that was something like on the agenda either for June or July. Is that something you'd be interested in?
Sure. Yeah, that sounds good.
So we'll have Robin come and do that presentation. Is that an opportunity, or would you like to take that opportunity to invite Hospital District 2? And we talked about doing a joint meeting, and that is data of the entire county. So I can extend that invitation if you're interested in doing that.
Yeah.
A joint board meeting?
Yeah, what would that?
Well, we would there wouldn't be real business conducted for Hospital District 2, but it would have to be advertised. Presumably all 5 members would be here, and Robin could address the health status and then the community health improvement plan as well for the entire county.
Okay. Yeah, I think it'd be great to invite him.
Okay. Yeah. Will do. Cabulance, the city of Ellensburg is imposed a tax to provide a cabulance service in town. I don't think you'd be surprised that KVH is in that conversation with the city, with KVFR. We're looking for a solution. They're having a really difficult time finding a provider that will actually provide that service. So, you're looking for someone 24/7 who can respond in 20 minutes with a special van to help people move from one location to another. So we're part of that conversation. I don't have a solution at this point for it, but we're involved in it.
Is that beyond the scope of our local taxi services if they acquire certain equipment?
Yeah. So this is specifically going to be wheelchair. You might have somebody who was brought from a nursing home to the emergency department and needs to get back to the nursing home. There's no medical necessity for that at this point, but maybe they're on oxygen or they're frail. So you want to make sure you have a point-to-point care.
Qualified personnel and appropriate.
But not people.
Are we getting pressured?
A little.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can be part of the solution and not the solution.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I just want to mention I will be out of town March 4th through the 6th at a CEO meeting for the Washington Rural Health Collaborative, which I described in my CEO report, and then also at a policy meeting at AHA the 14th through the 16th. So that's it for me.
Questions for CEO Peterson? Questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up on the agenda, medical staff, chief of staff, Dr. O'Brien.
Okay, this month we have in your list, you can see 5 initial appointments. All 5 have no issues in their records you'd be concerned about. First one, Stacy Black is a direct radiology, remotely reads our nighttime ED x-rays. The next 2, Ron Chabra and Ram Landian, are Virginia Mason telestroke providers that usually are assist in our stroke program remotely. And Marquetta Washington is a geriatric nurse practitioner that will be working with home health and prestige rehab. And Jocelyn Judd is separated from CHCW and is going to be working in our ED and urgent care CLEO and the PA. So the reappointments, 8 reappointments. Philip Nash first of all are associate or ambulatory, so associate usually means remote from our home base here. Philip Monash, Lung and Asthma Center of Central Washington. John Anderson, a direct radiology reader. Norm Shively, urology from Yakima. Lawrence Bubb, direct radiology, remote reader. John Wang, orthopedic and hand surgeon from Yakima, Orthopedics Northwest. David Stepanek, Yakima Valley Radiology. John Arias from direct radiology. And Nancy Wells, who is applying for renewal of ambulatory privileges. She's a part-time ambulatory practitioner. Her board status has expired, and so she's gone into basically the expiration of her board certification has occurred, and she does not plan to renew that based on her being part-time and not long in the future here. One issue, all of these have clean records since their last appointment. And that's why we address these reappointments, is since your last appointment, has anything changed or happened? For one case, Dr. Stepanek, there was a claim initiated, was reviewed by the malpractice provider, and was determined there was no basis for this claim, and in fact no legal activity has ensued to file the claim. So it's kind of a non-issue. Other than that, they all have clean records since their last appointment. MEC recommends you approve these applications for privileges and as they have requested.
So this may not surprise you, having just talked about physician credentialing, but there's a request that we discuss some of this at the executive session.
But while we're in open session, I'm hoping that you can entertain a question I have. Based on the discussion that was held and ambulatory status, in this provisional versus ambulatory in this situation, can you describe to us how ambulatory applies here?
Yes, provisional just refers to the first year.
Are there more privileges for them versus somebody who's ambulatory? Or
It depends. When they're provisional, yeah, they may be provisional with.
Let's say it's not provisional. It's just
Yeah, that's because provisional just means in the first year. But outside of that, there's ambulatory, associate, and active. Active means they can take care of patients in the hospital, write orders, inpatients, basically. Associate means they provide services to us, but they don't actually.
by distance, right?
Mostly, except that our ED providers are associated. Category 2.
Say that again.
They don't admit patients, right?
Correct. They don't admit patients to the hospital.
Okay.
So they're kind of.
The ED doctors don't admit patients?
It would be the
Oh, I was
hospital.
admitted this summer by an ED.
No, it would be the hospitals admitting the patient. So
The emergency
They
department's
recommended
technically an outpatient setting.
So it's fairly seamless to the patient. They don't see what happens in that way.
They recommend.
Well, I was in the emergency room and Dr. Cruz said this is potentially catastrophic. I want her admitted immediately.
Yeah, but he doesn't do the addition. Inpatient doctor.
I see.
So for Dr. Wells, what does ambulatory
Yes,
status?
well, for Dr. Wells, for instance, yeah, she's in her own private practice, and it's part-time. And ambulatory means she can order labs and x-rays through us.
Oh, okay. I was trying to figure out where that relationship lies.
And she can see a patient in her outpatient department for there. But she doesn't. She does everything in her office that she wants to do. And that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. That's a good question.
So, yeah, it's like, so why we should worry about board certification if all she's doing is orders and that and x-rays?
Okay, well, we appreciate you sticking around.
No,
Just a curiosity, I'm still bothered by this. Why can't an ED doctor admit?
Because
they have associate privileges.
They don't render care after the admission occurs.
They can't write that, they can't write orders.
Yeah, you can't leave the ED until an inpatient doctor has written admin orders for you.
Okay.
And then and Dr. Cruz cannot write any orders on an inpatient child.
He often talks that way.
Yeah, right. It sounds like it. I mean,
It sounds weird, but I get there's a reason for it.
Well, he's saying you should be admitted, so someone admits you.
Now, to complicate matters further, the inpatient doctor at a hospital can say, no, I don't think she needs admission. And then manage care on an outpatient basis, or initiate outpatient management care. No, they are not required to admit because the doctor says you need to be admitted. However, if we can
Usually
a limb to do that.
And how's the relationship between, say, clinic doctors and admission? Are they recommending admission to the hospitalist, or are they admitting?
Depends on if they have active staff privileges.
Then they
Since,
they can admit to themselves.
Yeah, Dr. Longrain, Amy, they can care for their own patients, so they admit care for their own.
They have active
If you're ambulatory, like Dr. Wells, then she would admit to the hospitals.
That makes sense.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Dr. Solberg?
All right. Well,
you guys gonna vote on those?
We're going to wait to vote, so
Executive.
we're going to talk. in
Well, you're going to be
executive.
here till midnight.
Who came up with that idea?
Okay, so most of the report stands fine. I am going to ask Lisa Potter on item number 2 to maybe speak to us a little bit and talk to us a little bit about some ideas we have around provision of dermatology services. And if you have a handout, which I'll be happy to hand out.
Thank you. I have to say, we took this pro forma to the finance committee, which was something we intend to do with the route.
I gave one to her. You gave me 2.
And I have a few extras if anybody else wants to. Anybody else?
I've got 2 as well.
Generous here. I'll pass them down.
Okay.
Have at it.
Okay. All right, well, this is more really of, as you can see here, kind of a different approach of introducing a service line to you. We're used to seeing some presentations and pro formas. With this particular service line, one of the great things about it is with the approach that we're choosing to take with bringing dermatology here to the community, it will require no capital investment initially. So we're kind of doing a 2-phase approach. We'll talk a little bit about that. But with this initial phase, it's not going to require any kind of upfront capital expenditures. So in an effort to increase access here in the county, we have extended an employment offer currently to a board-certified dermatologist, and I just got the word from Mitch via text earlier that she's on board, so that is very good. She'll be coming on board. It's a very part-time here initially. She'll be coming on board here for just 1 day per week.
practicing out of our internal medicine clinic. It is important to note that we do currently provide some dermatology services through our family practice clinic and maybe a little bit through internal medicine. We have an APC here who does about 45% of her visits are dermatology related. So we do offer some amount of dermatology currently. She typically sees people for skin lesions, rashes, different skin exams and cancer screenings and acne. She also, being an APC, refers out most frequently for Mohs consultations. And Mohs surgery is just a technique for the removal of cancerous cells. So she refers out for those consultations, procedures requiring specialized equipment, and then certain classes of drugs, most namely here isotretinoin, which if you've heard of Accutane, that's what that particular drug is. So we still have a need here for a dermatologist. And the model, again, as I mentioned earlier, is really a two-phase approach for implementation, with phase one bringing her on, like I said, just one day a week, practicing out of internal medicine. And she will offer also a supervision of that APC that I mentioned earlier. So that APC who is seeing roughly 40 to 45% of her visits dermatology related will now be able to increase the percentage of her visits that are derm related because she'll have a dermatologist supervising her. Does that make sense? Rather than a family practice physician.
Is the other dermatologist going to continue coming to the surgery clinic?
Yes. Before we move into phase two, I also want to note that throughout phase one, as I sort of see the beauty of this particular approach too, is that we're going to have the opportunity to really look at and analyze the type of visits that we're seeing with this dermatologist, how many procedures versus how many office visits, and that's really going to help us make a decision on how we want to go into our phase two. So under the phase two area here, you can see I have some different options listed, but I want to note that these are not the only options. I just want to give you a picture of what it could look like. So one option might be a standalone clinic location for a derm practice with the flexibility to increase that dermatologist presence here to up to 2 days per week. And we could co-locate our APC with the dermatologist and increase her visits to 100% dermatology. So it will be a true derm clinic.
Is she going to have a procedure room to do surgeries over in internal medicine?
Yes. And the equipment needed is very minimal for the types of procedures they do. Second option might be a standalone clinic location to house the APC with our dermatologist continuing to practice out of an existing KVH clinic, likely family medicine or internal medicine. And I know we had a question on that earlier this week about why we might do something like that, and it really gets into the nuances of how we're going to bill for services moving forward, if it's going to be under RHC or provider based, and how we might want to separate out the visits seen by our dermatologist. Again, we need to do a little bit more of the data analytics with the types of visits that we're seeing with our initial phase one. Another option might be to continue, just if this model is working well in phase one and there's no real indication or need that we quickly expand the service, we might just continue with the phase one approach until expansion is indicated. And we've seen the pace of change and new opportunity here is pretty quickly lately, so I wanted to leave open the option that there could be additional opportunity or options that present themselves here in the next few months that we haven't thought of, that we can move into. Some things that we'll really want to measure and manage during phase one that we'll be looking at are the frequency of referrals to dermatology from our current KVH providers. So we want to ensure and sort of, keep our fingers on whether or not our current providers are aware of this service and making the referrals as needed to open up their access, and not only the community's access to derm, but again, to free them up for other types of visits. We want them to be sure that they're utilizing the derm service. And then a little bit, there could be some market demand, we're thinking, for additional dermatology services that are typically co-located with a clinical dermatology practice. So we're talking about anything from, basically aesthetic dermatology. So we'll be taking a look at that market as well and seeing what makes sense in moving forward. Do we incorporate that, and how does that look? So it's kind of up in the air at this point. I wanted to give you a quick snapshot too of the market that we're looking at for dermatology here. Down at the bottom of this first page, I just have a little table here showing you, based on national averages and statistics, the projected rate for patients who seek dermatology services, and we boiled that down, of course, to Kittitas County. And on the bottom line there, you can see if we take those averages and apply them to our county here, the market, the high market, we would estimate for the number of visits per year we would have to capture would be 5,175. There are some assumptions, or I should say there's some additional data having to do with the number, it's on the top of the next page. The overall visits to healthcare providers per capita in Washington State is lower than the national average, and in rural communities it's lower than in non-rural communities. We don't have specific data as to how much lower. So to be conservative for this particular service line, we just had it half. So we said the low estimate is about 50%. In reality, it's going to be somewhere in the middle. So it'll be between the high and low.
Well, I mean, you're aware that that the board, with our commitment to access, that we think that there's a demand that's not being met in several areas. And so obviously we want to see what happens at phase one, but I think we like the idea of being aggressive. And so.
Yes. And speaking of being aggressive, on the second page there, I wanted to show you, just bringing on this dermatologist, obviously there's costs involved with that, not only for salary, but some other things that cost of supervising an APC or mid-level provider. What it would take for her to just break even, so to speak, for bringing her here is simply 12 visits per day. So again, with her being here 1 day per week, we're looking at 12 visits. That's what she would have to see to just meet her costs associated with being here. The average dermatologist sees around 30 patients a day. So this is a very conservative, low break-even number that we're looking at here. I don't want you to think that we're shooting for 12. Being aggressive, we're just saying this would be pretty easy for her to meet.
But she has to do surgery.
She does have to do a surgery. She'll have lots of resources, right? Okay. We're also looking at the APC being able to increase her dermatology visits from 45% in year 1 to 65% year 2 and 85% by year 3. Again, we really feel like the market is there. These should not be difficult numbers to reach. At the bottom of the page in those bar graphs you see, really the point in including those is so that you can get a quick visual there with, if we were to be at full capacity and meet all of our projected visits with the high market demand, we're still only capturing 24% of the market we think we have in this community. If you have that market and go with the low market demand, you can visually see there how much market is still left to capture. This is a good thing. That means there's lots of opportunity out there. We can see what expansion looks like. We can see what that service center looks like for us. Do you have any questions about this?
We're not asking for action at all. This is a new line of business, so we just want to make you aware. And phase 2 would require some action, so we'll just keep informed.
I've just mentioned this offhandedly a couple of times. People are all over me.
I was all over it. Yeah, they're dermatology.
There is a recurring request. Even for people who need to run for care, it is hard to find appointments because they are just booked up solid and nothing's
It's really long to get in.
Any questions for Lisa? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Solberg?
One additional thing I'd just like to call out, mentioned it under the clinic council, that I think our medical staff has been very engaged in the whole summer process, but a special call out to Dr. Kelly Noyes.
Absolutely.
Really is due her. If you run into Kelly in the hospital or in the next few weeks, please say thank you. Your praises were sung in those. I think we would probably not have done as well, and Jack has left, so he doesn't get to hear me say this, but we would probably not have done as well with our implementation if Kelly hadn't stepped up and said, all right, clearly this project needs a physician champion, and I can see the role to do it. I will do that, and she served that role admirably. And that role before previous EHR implementations is a very difficult role. I think Kelly did a tremendous job. So I just wanted
An
to say
example of that on day one, and she's an internist who's one of our inpatient hospitalists. But on day one, we discovered that our OR did not have at the elbow support from Cerner. There'd been a mix-up, and she was so well versed in the system, she actually stepped in and did that on February 12th. She has been incredible.
And she's been involved from the beginning. She was involved with the selection. So she's 2 years,
Should she be
plus
like
years
2
into
capes?
this.
Yeah, she
Yes.
has 2 kids and
She's
now
just-
got a TR.
Yeah.
Yep.
And a teacher.
Ask her how much extra she's getting paid to do this.
You can take it. Too far. We can take it.
Go ahead. Any other questions?
I would like to, I was particularly interested in the pediatric call coverage report. Pediatrics is near and dear to my heart, and it just really drives home. There are many holes that Dr. Waltner left with his passing, but his 216 call days that had to be filled, and that we've got providers stepping up to.
We are fully covered through the end of February now, and minus people volunteering signing up and agreeing to the paltry pay that we're paying for above their required call. But we're working on March. We are hoping to amplify the number of providers that are trained and capable of doing this. We've had an excellent response, and people willing and interested to do that on the staff. So we're working on getting in the middle of all the rest of this craziness, trying to get some training set up for some of those folks to further amplify the calls.
And also emergency credentialing.
What was that?
Emergency credentialing.
Additional questions for Dr. Solberg? Thank you. Okay, CFO report, and by the way, since you talked earlier, Libby, I'm going to count that against your time.
You are nice people. Some good things to report.
Oh, all right.
So, well, you've got the report here in front of you for the financials for the month, but, and I'm happy to answer questions on that, but there are a couple of other things I wanted to report on as well. As you know, we've been pursuing the possibility of a 2018 revenue bond issue to help refinance a portion of the purchase of the MAC building. And we've been working with Piper Jaffray. We have an idea that they're saying that the rates could be between 3.85 and 3.95 for tax exempt. They've gone up, but they've gone up as a result of the recent tax legislation, which has reduced their desirability, I guess is an easy way to put it. As you'll recall, our 2017 issue was 4.21 for the taxable portion and 3.09 for the tax exempt portion. We are, as I mentioned, moving forward. We've completed a draft of the Appendix A. It would again be a private placement, and we're hoping for a possible early May close. We'll be issuing the RFP with the Appendix A
explain to me this increase in accounts receivable days from 50.8 to 53?
I think there are a couple things going on there. Part of it is we have had some staffing issues with some leadership roles, some folks staying on Illinois. We've asked folks to refocus on that. I would suspect, I certainly hope that legacy AR will be brought down with this firm that's come in to focus specifically on that. So that is in part why our contractuals were up a bit as well, because that meant that there were some accounts that were older, and we have to reserve more on those older accounts. So, but that leads me to the second thing I want to tell you about. We had engaged with a contractor to help us, well, actually to drive our payer contract, and we have contracts with many payers, and we were having a particularly difficult time with contract renewal with one payer, Kaiser, which used to be Group Health. We had a terrible contract with Group Health that we had for some time, and it was difficult to get them to move on that because Group Health was having some issues financially, and then they were in a position where they were trying to position themselves to be purchased by Kaiser. And so we were having real trouble having them get to a point where they were paying us appropriately. This current go around, we determined that they were paying us about, I think it was less than 50% of charges, something like 44% of charges on the outpatient side, which is just not sustainable. We were particularly concerned because going back to the PEP for our employees, we're opening up to even more coverage by Kaiser in our community. So we kind of came to a head with our previous contract negotiator, and we brought on a new person who actually our PFS director had met at one of her professional meetings. And he just jumped into the middle of this, and we just received yesterday a note from the person that he's working with at Kaiser, and they're coming to the table finally, and they have proposed increase on the outpatient side of 18%, a 4-year contract first of all, an increase of 18% on the outpatient side for the first year, 14 the second year, and then 5 and 3, and this is huge.
Yeah.
They've acknowledged that they want to be a community partner. They recognize the importance of a rural hospital to serve their enrollees. So we're very happy with this. It's the first contract that this new person has worked on for us. And
That's
it's a lot less expensive than our previous one too.
And that's the insurer for the biggest employer in town.
Yes,
so that's
yes.
pretty.
And they were our worst payer, our absolute worst. So we're really encouraged by this.
That's great.
And we're hoping to have that a contract signed in the next couple of weeks. So.
What's the name of our new contract negotiator?
Andy Working. Nobody that we would know. He works with a lot of rural facilities in California and in Washington. I think a couple in Idaho. But that's kind of his specialty, which is important for us because the person that we had previously, I don't think knew that much about rural. And when she was talking with the payers, she was talking in language that's around how urban hospitals get paid. So prospective payment sort of language. And that really isn't applicable here. And also, I think that Julie and I had a meeting with Kaiser and this previous negotiator, and it was a very adversarial sort of approach, would you say, Julie?
Which is just not that we...
Yeah, we want to be partners with our payers. You know, we recognize that they've got enrollees that they're wanting to serve, and we want to have a good relationship. So we're very encouraged. The next one up is a Premier contract, which hopefully will be successful with as well. So, yeah, so hopefully when this is in place, we should start to address those issues around our contractual allowance, if you hope, because we should be able to see a higher payment rate. Okay?
Okay.
Quick question on the bulk payment.
Yeah.
How often do we receive those?
Well, I think it would be each year, each tax year.
Okay.
This is the first time I remember seeing it. You remember the presentation?
I remember. already been talking
Right.
with us about that, and
Right.
I want to say our share was upwards of $100,000. That we should be getting, or is that the schools?
I don't think ours was $100,000, because remember, we have a pretty small levy.
Okay. Well, it's good to see it there.
Yeah, it was.
FTEs are up this month, I think 18.7 are attributable to Cerner, so that's not really anticipated.
I've got a couple quick questions on this. The key metrics, are these pretty standard for rural hospitals?
Pretty standard for hospitals.
Period.
I think in general, yes.
And how do they compare with comparable hospitals?
Well, our days cash on hand is pretty darn good. And when we, part of the reason, we were actually, I think, up to 78. I can't remember if we were higher than that. There are many hospitals that have 20 days cash or 50 days cash.
Yeah, when we go to Chelan and mention this, everybody
Right.
is jealous.
Yes.
You go flashing it around.
Yes,
Yeah,
but, and
154
so,
days here.
also when we actually bought the building we bought recently was cash. And that's why we're wanting to refinance it, because we want to replenish our reserves. Because we use these to invest in capital investments, et cetera. So this is very strong, and it's also a very good position to be in, given that we just went on this new system. Because although we hope that it doesn't disrupt our cash flow, we'd probably be foolish to think that it won't. So this is a good cushion for us to cover that. The AR days, I think, are higher than they should be. Yeah, I think industry average is probably, good is 50, so 53 is not bad. Some people have much higher than that. We have pretty favorable payer mix here because of the high proportion of commercial. And I think part of that is because of the university, the county seat, et cetera, the hospital. So 50 is been our target over the last several years. I think we might have, did we drop it down this year at all? No. So it's been our target. So this is a little higher than our target.
Okay.
So,
And margins?
well, operating margin, some have 0. And this is a respectable margin. Yes.
Any additional questions? Any other questions regarding that?
It will be interesting to see what the accounts receivable does over the next few months.
It will be, and it'll be interesting to see how we pull it together too, because we'll have both the new and the old, and we'll have to figure out how to sort of blend that together. We may want to actually track them separately.
Any other questions for Liz?
Sorry, I took up too much time.
I'll excuse it.
I think it was wonderful.
I'll forgive you. Okay, Finance Committee report?
Very briefly, we discussed the positive January figures. We had a report from Lisa Carr, the one she gave tonight, we asked her some questions and got good answers. I think that we discussed AR days in particular and had a good discussion of that. For me, the remaining issue is clinics. I think we discussed this in the meeting, but we're feeling that the old clinic culture in which the clinics were independently owned and established their own processes, declared their own vacation times and their absences, and decreed the number of minutes per visit and the number of visits. Even though we now employ these people, they're still locked into their prior culture. And I feel I convey that to both Libby and I need to probably convey it as I'm doing now at Carrie, but to Julie, that we need to enforce our expectations. We have, for various reasons, been, I think, too placid in allowing the clinics to dictate the terms when we employ them. They need to step up. The clinic loss last month was shocking because January is not a vacation month. Now, we learned that there were 2 providers in internal medicine who had emergency leave. But that doesn't explain the enormous loss and way, way above budget. And the number of visits way down. And I, as a board member, want to ask that we to make a more concerted effort to get the clinics into compliance with our institutional expectations. That we use our clout, and that if they don't.
Well, let's not finish that sentence about what we're going to do.
Well, I don't think, to me, it's a very serious matter. We have not used our clout. And we have tried, and since Carrie came aboard, she's worked very hard on this, and so it's no casting aspersions at her. I think it's just they dig their heels in, and it's time to, whatever that means and however that's done, whatever clout we exercise in a collaborative and congenial way, do we need to get them to step up. So that's my point. We discussed this in the meeting, and there's sort of general agreement. How that will happen is still iffy, but the will to make it happen is there.
Julie, did you have something?
Yeah, one of the things my goals for 2018 is to establish what we're calling a provider compensation committee. And we don't have a philosophy about what we reward. We don't have a philosophy about how we feel about productivity. As much as you want your providers to be productive, you also want your providers finishing their charts so you can get the bills out. You want quality care delivered. So really having providers at the table, board members at the table, staff to assist in evaluation so that we can come to an agreement about what it is we're incentivizing and what we're rewarding. And I think we get a long way towards what you're articulating if we can do that. Right now, we have work harder, work faster as kind of our tool. And there's been no dialogue, there's been no coming together that says, we have to keep the doors open. There is an expectation of productivity. It's not going to be the same in every clinic. When you look at general surgery and orthopedics, where they're generating revenues in the OR. So there's a bigger picture we need to come to an agreement on how we're going to evaluate. And I think it's going to be a long process, and we've talked even about bringing a facilitator in, because I think it's going to be critical in sort of revamping that culture.
So a big chunk of that cloud, I guess, would be the compensation spend.
Yes, and I think that this coming together.
And I think we have to also acknowledge that over the next couple of months, you shouldn't expect to see this change because we've implemented this new system, and as Carrie will probably report, there are some bottlenecks there, and even though we budgeted for some reduced productivity, we'll probably see more reduced productivity. So.
Great. Any questions from Leanna regarding the finance committee?
We have no capital requests this time.
Thank you. Okay, operations. Vicky Machar.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Greetings from Patient Care Services.
Yes,
my report's brief. It looks like we haven't been doing anything, but I just want to reiterate what Julie said. The staff is really, really exhausted. The first week we were just kind of in euphoria, and now it's kind of hitting us. We're having to do a lot of rework and just relearn the system and processes, so they're really tired. But once again, they really stepped up. They're helping one another. They're coming on their days off to teach their coworkers. So it's really a display of them wanting to make this work and work right. On the upside, the urgent care, it's seeing more patients since their move. So that's just wonderful.
That's what we're hoping.
Yeah, and it's working. And they implemented Cerner as well, so they've had some struggles and hurdles, but once again, they seem to be their own little machine up there and are able to go through their processes and learn quickly as well. Other than that, it's business as usual. We're still taking care of patients and serving patients.
That's good.
Along with that. Yeah.
And they've been very busy.
Yes, they've been busy.
I would like to call out too that the surgery department, please be a little bit sensitive to.
Yes.
Many of them went from paper to electronics. So although the rest of us changed electronic record systems, and that's one kind of service. We all remember how awful it was from paper, and so they've had the steepest learning curve.
Right.
So.
And they've got like 5 different modules back there just because of the complexity of everything, so they've had to learn almost twice as much.
They were your first one?
For pregnancy records.
Yes, from the clinics. Yes.
Any questions for Vicki? Thank you. Next, Ron Holden, Ancillary Services.
Hello.
Hi.
So in addition to what I provided in the packet, Julie did share with me the letter that Dr. Feldman had written to the board, and I am happy to take questions about that. I will tell you, last week was fraught with a lot of emails back and forth with the radiologists, and I think Dr. Feldman has had probably more anxiety than some of the others related to this, and we have had meetings with him specifically in the past regarding transcription and voice dictation. Dr. Hand was actually our radiologist who was here all last week, and the first day he wasn't able to actually pull images up after he left and went back to Yakima. But we were able to send images to direct radiology, and it actually wasn't the PACS system causing problems. I think it was just training on the protocols and how to access information. So we did send down people to set up the protocols for each radiologist on all of their computers. I asked Dr. Hand about the voice dictation. He says he loves it works perfectly. He didn't have any concerns at all with that. And then following up with Dr. Stepanek with all the emails bouncing around, Dr. Stepanek and I determined that he would be the point of contact for the radiologist and I would be the point of contact for imaging here. And he felt like things were actually going quite well and seemed quite pleased. So I think that, as I mentioned, I think that Dr. Feldman in particular is one of maybe 2 of the 8 that has a lot of concern regarding transcription.
Do you know why there's such a? I didn't mean to interrupt. Do you know why there's such a difference in the evaluation of the dictation?
It's a lot to learn. It has to recognize your voice, and I think that if you don't use the program correctly, and Dr. Solberg speaks very well to this, if you don't correct the error appropriately, the system doesn't learn to recognize your voice. You have to train it. And so if you allow that error to occur over and over and over again, it thinks that it's doing it correctly. And so there's an actual system on how to correct those errors so that it does recognize what you're trying to say and stops making the mistake that it made. I know some of the exams are complex, and we may look at providing transcription for those complex exams. We just want to be very careful that that's not the crutch that they fall back on, because the transcription services cause a delay in patient care and in the physicians getting those results. So there's about a 3 to 4 day delay before those results are available to our patients. With the voice recognition dictation, it's immediate. As soon as it's there, the provider can see it. And so it's really not a system that we want to hang on to. It's definitely being used across the United States as far as voice dictation now, and we don't want to be hanging on to that antique crutch.
We called it Blockbuster.
Yeah, we don't want to go to less Blockbuster. So it is challenging, though. We have had a lot of challenges in imaging, and our staff have just, been phenomenal. Our radiologists have been phenomenal. They really have just hung in there. It's been frustrating. It's been hard work. But we're getting through it, and things I think are getting better and better. So out of all of it, to me, the voice dictation is going really well. There were some other concerns from time to time. I know this week we had challenges sending images to Virginia Mason, to Children's, to Harborview, to Memorial and Regional, but we were able to problem solve and work around it and get the images sent. So it's not been easy. It's been blood, sweat, and tears.
Are we going to be able to get images sent to our offices?
You can pull them up. You should be able to pull them up. Yep, on GPACS. Okay, and we need to know those things, so if it's not working, we can help troubleshoot that for you.
This is one of the things Stacey Olea did as we were working through the anxiety prior to go live. VIA Memorial is coming up on Cerner in October. Astria starts based with the radiology folks there. We're doing exactly the same thing right now that these folks are going to be confronted on a much larger scale in June and in October. So I think there's a bigger sort of cloud of anxiety that's going on here. But we, again, pre-go live we had meetings and came to some agreements. Post-go live we've been very attentive to the concerns I think that the radiologists have. And they are real patient care concerns that we have to.
So you've reached out to this
I just saw a copy of the letter right before this meeting, so I haven't reached out to him again, but I will, and I'll reach out to Dr. Stepanek tomorrow as well to see what services we can provide. Dr. Feldman was scheduled to be our radiologist last week, or this week, and they took him off the schedule so that he doesn't have to be here. We've got another one already. So.
I appreciate that, the spectrum perspectives on what's happening. So I'm glad that's not everybody's experience.
Yeah, I was really surprised that Dr. Han, last week saying, "Oh, Medicare is wonderful. I love it. It's perfect. It's working great." You're kidding me. How can this be? But it's one person can use it really well and another one is struggling. And I think we have that on the clinic side as well. Some doctors are able to use it quite well. Others are really struggling.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but on the front end, you may be talking into one system. What translates almost everything now is Dragon. Dragon is the product that's actually doing, the transcription for you. So it's the standard. So.
Other questions or questions about the report here? Any questions? Thank you. Carrie Barr, Clinic Operations.
So I have my short report as well. Again, same thing with everybody else. It looks like we haven't done anything, but I broke down some training hours so you can see exactly how many hours we have been training as everyone else. And as we have been alluding to, just talking about bottlenecks within the clinics and our workflow in the center, I'd like to just also report on that. We had about 2 weeks before go live where we found out legacy data was not moving into the Cerner way. And with that means every patient that presents is a blood chart. So we have staff that is putting in an incredible amount of hours to make sure that the providers have everything that they need for the patient in Cerner, so they don't have to flip between NextGen and Cerner. And the providers, as we've been saying, the providers are really loving the system. It's going really well. And they're ready to amp up their patient volume. They're ready to step it up. But we know now that if we do that, we'll probably break the current staff. It's not sustainable. So we're really we're bringing in the group and trying to figure out the right solutions to make this happen quickly so that we can get the correct data into the charts for the providers.
So they're taking summaries from the legacy data through like a PDF file or something?
No, it's manual.
It's just manual.
Current state, it's manual.
I mean, there was a lot of work that went into legacy stuff. What happened to...
What had been promised or what had been indicated that was a functionality as far as moving data from one to the other ended up not being the reality. Once that was discovered, I think teams...
Which was about February 1st.
Which was about February 1st when I found that out. So
it's NextGen's fault.
No, probably Cerner, because they demoed something in 2 different places.
Well, they said.
Yeah, but I think there is a solution now that's being worked on, but sadly, it's a couple weeks out. So.
But I do think we infused some urgency.
Yes,
there was not enough energy on the Cerner side around fixing this, and I think we delivered that message.
Yes. I think Julie delivered that message quite well. So anyway, just knowing that we are experiencing again some bottlenecks in our processes that we weren't expecting before. So the other piece of that is some bottlenecks on the front side of phone calls that we were able to start addressing and start creating some better processes, but it was, we would have to open up the chart, create a historical encounter before even taking a patient phone call. And so this really delayed even just the simple task of how can I help you today. So we still have to create that historical encounter, but we're getting faster at that, and we're creating some other systems and other processes to help with that. Every day we're learning something new, and just really trying to make sure we don't burn out our current staff. That's really good.
Carrie, could you explain, first of all, I'm not sure what GMP manager, what is GMP?
Yeah, geriatric nurse practitioner manager, yes.
Okay, so this person will be the clinic manager for internal medicine, women's health, and geriatric nurse practitioner program.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and that's Rachel Scott. She just started today. We're very excited to have her on board. Myself and April Grant have been standing in the place within those clinics, and kudos to both of those groups who have, without a clinic manager, have been able to go with this conversion and be able to handle it quite well. So very proud of them.
Other questions for Carrie?
I have one. Looking at the third available appointment method here for FME. And 88. And can you refresh me what happened between May and June that caused this to go so far?
So third available for new patients?
Yes, for FME.
So this in looking at over the whole trend and how it continues to stay in that high level. This is actually a meeting that we're having with Dr. Meryl Stesko and Dr. Larson tomorrow to address just this. We have Brett White and Julia are two new physician assistants that just came on board. So now that they've established and now that they're on board and through our Cerner conversion, it's time to open them up. And that is the goal is to then decrease this. This is to get the new patients. We're also working with Anita Schultz at Internal Medicine to have her look at these new patients that may be waiting for Dr. Breeden and or Megan Power, but seeing if those are patients that she could be taking care of with her internal medicine academy.
But is there anything in particular that happened in May? Because it looked like it was going okay up until through May, and then it rocketed off there.
One thing that may contribute to that is if you look at the new patients, there was a bit of a jump in new patients for beta.
But we can only have new patients if the books are open and we have.
I wonder if maybe you could tell me, like, I mean, we opened up it up to new patients. Maybe there was just such a big demand, right, that we sort of handled all we could, but there was even more demand.
Got out behavior.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I could look into that further. There's probably some assumptions there, and that's a good one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions for Carrie?
I was going to mention that, but with the Cerner stuff, I was not going to bring that.
If this had been the trend in February had gone up, then I would have been like, I mean, they're prepping, of course.
Yeah, back in
That's
May.
all the way back.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, but I appreciate it. That's a very fine point.
Thank you.
All right, any last questions for Carrie? All right, thank you, Carrie. All right, Education Board reports. The AHA annual membership meeting is coming up in May. And there's a flyer here, I guess, that we have. Julie, you have anything to say about this? You want to encourage us to go? Or?
Yes, this is a meeting I know Bob Davis went to last year, and Bob Crow went to. Frankie has blocked some rooms. It'll be at Hilton, DC Hilton again. The rooms we got were at the Churchill. It's a nice room. But the advocacy push for 2018 is really going to be about the 340B program. Right now, again, for the PPS hospital not being cut, PPS hospitals are down about 26% on that program, but we always feel like once they figured out how to mess with a program like that, it's only a matter of time to critical access hospitals. So a big push, the AHA is suing CMS over that issue, but we'll be talking about that. Also, just general budget issues, not so much for this budget cycle, but going into 2019, just really pressing on our congressional delegation that we've already given.
If we added incentive, I'd like to call your attention to the inside of the front cover, down in the lower left, this comedy troupe called Capital Steps.
Oh, they are really good.
Entertaining.
So, okay, so if we're interested in this, we should just notify you and Frank.
Let Frankie know.
All right.
We'll get to vote.
Do we have any, have people indicated whether they want to attend rural advocacy days? No, in Washington.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, I mean, I did that last fall with Bob. I mean, I thought it was. I mean, I find it very illuminating. Just a great experience.
You know, it's amazing this year to think. Last year, it was all about repeal and replace. We knew exactly what we were going to, who our target was, what we were going to talk about. We have all our numbers. This is such a moving target right now. So I think everybody's just preparing a lot of background information because we don't know what's going to raise. We may be back to Medicaid block grants by September. If that's the case, you know, we need to have the information. But it should be really interesting work.
Are you asking, Leanna, because the idea is? Are you asking about which one should prefer? Like this?
I think I'm just asking if there are people who, I haven't gone for several years, and I think I would like to go this year if I can manage it. It's a very good experience, and you meet the legislators, and you're seeing government in action, and you're seeing citizens who are having an effect on moving their legislators to hear their issues, and so it's very valuable.
Well, only on one change, Washington and Oregon coordinate those activities, you know, and our delegations between the two really do have some
That's exciting. That's exciting. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you. No old business, new business. So there are a couple of articles, including a CEO or a letter to the editor from our very own CEO. You can look at that if you haven't seen it yet. Anything else before we? All right, so what we're going to do now is recess into executive session. We'll take a 10-minute break so people can get their food until 8:25, and then we'll convene into executive session to discuss personnel and real estate under RCW 42.30.110B. And we'll be in executive session